Imagine the chilling silence before the storm, then the sudden earth-shattering impact of a trebuchet. What did it truly sound like to be trapped within the stone walls of a medieval castle as it fought for its very existence? Prepare to be transported back in time, not with your eyes, but with your ears, to experience the terrifying symphony of a medieval siege. You've found your way back to boring history, traveler. The candles are lit, the fire is low, and the world outside can wait for a while. Before we wander into the shadows of the past, take a slow breath, let your shoulders fall, let the noise of your day fade into the quiet hum of history. These stories take time, and if you've been enjoying drifting through the ruins and whispers with me, remember to subscribe. It's a small gesture that keeps this little corner of calm alive. It keeps the doors open, the candle burning, and the long nights of storytelling alive for everyone who needs them. Tonight's journey will be a quiet one, though not without unease. We're not chasing battles or heroes or shining victories. We're listening to what it sounded like when fear lived inside stone walls, when men waited for dawn that might never come, and when history itself seemed to breathe through cracks in the mortar. Tonight, we're hearing the terrifying sounds of a medieval castle under siege, not as soldiers, but as ghosts passing through time. So find a comfortable place to rest, close your eyes, and let the first sound be silence. It begins quietly, as most terrible nights do, with the kind of silence that feels aware of itself. The castle sleeps uneasily beneath a sky that has forgotten stars. Clouds hang heavy above the towers, hiding the moon, pressing down on the world like a warning. Inside the walls, everything feels smaller than it should. The corridors, the hallways, even the breath in one's chest. The great hall is dim, its torches burning low, their flames bending with each sigh of wind that sneaks in through the arrow slits. The air smells of iron and tallow and smoke, old smells that cling to stone and refuse to leave. In the distance, a single door creaks, the sound echoing down the passage like a memory of movement. The guards at the gate say nothing, but they glance toward the horizon, toward the place where the road disappears into the forest. They saw the fires there earlier, campfires, hundreds of them, and they know what it means. The day had been long, full of nervous energy. Men sharpened blades that were already sharp. Women filled barrels with water and stacked them along the walls. Arrows were counted, ropes were mended, and the blacksmith worked until his arms shook. Even the dogs felt it. They barked at the empty air, their hackles raised, their bodies trembling with something they couldn't name. By sunset, everyone was pretending to be calm, but you could hear the truth in their movements. Buckles fumbling, spoons clinking against untouched bowls, voices dropping to whispers when footsteps echoed too close. The lord of the castle had stood on the battlements at dusk, his cloak tugged by the wind, watching the tree line where the enemy would appear. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was soft. "Double the watch," he said. And then, almost to himself, "They'll come at dawn." No one corrected him, though everyone knew it might be sooner. As darkness fell, the castle pulled inward. The outer courtyards emptied, and the gates groaned as they were barred shut. The heavy timbers slid into place with the finality of a tomb lid. Inside, fires were lit, though they did little to warm the high, drafty halls. The servants moved quickly, carrying buckets, tending the animals, closing shutters that rattled in the wind. In the kitchens, the cooks whispered prayers as they cleaned the last pots. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. This might be their final meal for a long time. The bread was rough and dry, the broth thin, but people ate it in silence, each mouthful heavy with the knowledge that hunger was coming. Somewhere, a child began to cry, but her mother hushed her before the sound could echo. Even the smallest noise felt dangerous now, like it might invite something dark to listen. In the upper chambers, the soldiers prepared for the night. Armor clanked softly as they checked straps and tightened belts. Some sat sharpening blades on whetstones, the steady rasp filling the air like a kind of uneasy lullaby. Others stared into the flames, eyes glassy with fatigue and fear. A few tried to sleep, curled against the cold stone, their cloaks pulled tight. The young ones, the new recruits who had never seen battle, were the quietest. You could see them mouthing prayers, though they barely remembered the words. Their hands shook as they held their swords, not from cold, but from knowing what those weapons were truly for. The older men didn't speak either. They didn't need to. They had seen. In the heart of the kingdom, where stone walls whisper tales of old, lived for souls bound by duty and fate, Lord Valerius, a man forged in battle, his face a map of countless campaigns, ruled with an iron fist but a surprisingly soft heart. His ornate armor wasn't just for show. It was a constant reminder of the peace he fought so hard to protect. Every morning, he'd stand on the parapets, his gaze sweeping over the lands he cherished, a silent promise to his people. Patrolling those same walls was Elian, a young watchman barely out of his teens. With his tousled brown hair and boundless energy, he saw the world not as a battlefield, but as a place of endless possibility. He'd often trade stories with the merchants passing through the gates, his laughter echoing in the morning air. He respected the Lord, of course, but he dreamed of a day when his sword would be used, not for defense, but to carve a path to new adventures beyond the horizon. In the quiet solitude of the chapel, Father Michael tended to his flock, his hair as white as fresh snow, and his gentle eyes had seen generations come and go. He wasn't just a man of faith, he was the keeper of the kingdom's history, the voice of wisdom that tempered the Lord's steel. He believed that true strength wasn't found in armor, but in compassion and understanding, a lesson he tried to impart to everyone, from the mightiest lord to the humblest servant. And then there was Lyra, the young servant whose bright spirit was as radiant as her blonde ponytail. Quick on her feet, and even quicker with a smile, she navigated the castle's corridors with a grace that belied her simple dress. She saw the good in everyone, the weary responsibility in the Lord's eyes, the hopeful ambition in Elian's, and the serene kindness in Father Michael's. In her own quiet way, she was the thread that connected them all. A reminder that even in a world of lords and soldiers, it's the simple acts of kindness that truly hold a kingdom together. These four, so different in station and age, were the pillars of their small world. Their lives, interwoven in the grand tapestry of the kingdom, show us that strength comes in many forms, and that every role, no matter how small, is vital. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this glimpse into their world, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time. The sound filled everything. It was in the walls, in the air, in the trembling of hands, and the pounding of blood. It drowned out thought. It was meant to. That was the purpose of siege drums. After all, they were not music, they were a weapon. A sound designed to break patience, to wear down courage, to remind those behind the walls that an army had the power to summon rhythm from fear itself. In the great hall, the women and children gathered near the hearth, their faces lit by the weak glow of the fire. One of the older women began to hum softly, a lullaby without words, just a sound to fill the air against the drums. The others joined her, quiet at first, then a little louder. It didn't drown out the noise outside, but it softened the edges of it, turned it into something less sharp. Even a few of the soldiers in the corridor paused to listen as they passed, their faces relaxing for a heartbeat before the next drumbeat struck. On the wall, the captain of the archers lifted his hand. The line of men beside him steadied. They could now see the enemy camp forming in the distance, tents going up, banners planted, lines of men moving like ants. A few fires burned low where the vanguard had paused for warmth. Between them and the castle lay open ground, scattered with boulders and patches of mud. The captain turned to the Lord, who had joined him on the rampart. "They'll be ready by midday," he said. The Lord nodded, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "Then we will be too." The drums changed again, breaking into smaller rhythms, some fast, some slow, some pulsing like the breath of a living thing. It was as if different groups were speaking to each other through sound, passing messages across the valley. The defenders couldn't understand the meaning, but they could feel it, something vast being organized out there in the mist. Siege towers, perhaps trebuchets, ranks forming. The sound was telling them, "We are coming." The hours stretched thin. The castle moved in a strange half-light between waiting and action. Armor was checked again and again. Arrows were laid out in neat rows. Every noise inside the walls felt loud and out of place. The squeak of a hinge, the clang of a dropped cup, the sudden cry of a baby somewhere below. Each sound was met with silence afterward, as if the whole castle were holding its breath to listen. And then, sometime before noon, the rhythm of the drums changed one last time. The slow, distant heartbeat became something sharper, faster, merciless. The men on the wall leaned forward, trying to see. A scout shouted from the tower that he saw movement in the field. Another shouted that the enemy had begun to roll something forward, something large. The first siege engine was coming into view. The captain raised his voice, calling the archers to ready themselves. The drums quickened, no longer distant, no longer patient. The sound hit the castle like a wave. It was no longer a warning, it was a command. The siege had truly begun. It began as a tremor, not a sound. A pulse in the ground, too steady to be wind, too patient to be thunder. Inside the castle, where the last of the candles were guttering in their iron brackets, no one spoke of it at first. The servants who were awake told themselves it was nothing, the kind of noise the earth makes when it settles after rain. But the truth was that every ear in the stone keep had already noticed. The sound did not come from within, it came from beyond the walls, faint, deliberate, and measured like a heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing inside. The night had been still before it came. Now it felt like the darkness had learned to breathe. In the upper hall, where the garrison slept on straw mats laid across cold flagstones, a few men stirred. One rolled over and muttered that the river must be rising. Another, younger and newly conscripted, froze mid-turn, eyes open in the dark. He had never heard a siege drum before, but instinct told him what it was long before his mind caught up. It came again slow, heavy, and distant. A single thud stretched thin across the night, then silence, then another, like the march of something vast moving through fog. He lay still, eyes tracing the wooden beams above his head, heart thudding too fast to count. The noise was faint, but it seemed to fill every corner of the room, slipping into the cracks of sleep and dragging it away. Down below, in the kitchens, a woman who had been tending the last of the embers straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. The dogs outside the gatehouse were restless now, pacing and whining. She whispered a prayer under her breath, though she didn't know to whom. The air itself felt different, heavier, as though it carried a promise. She climbed the narrow stairwell that led to the courtyard and pushed open the door. The sky was black velvet, unbroken, and the wind had died completely. She listened at first, nothing. Then, across the fields beyond the moat, she heard it clearly. Boom, pause, boom. A rhythm older than language, meant for hearts, not ears. The guards on the wall had been whispering for some time. One of them leaned out over the battlements, trying to make out the direction. He could see nothing but the vague suggestion of trees in the moonlight and the silvered gleam of the distant river. He spat into the dark and muttered that they'd come at last. No one answered. In the stillness, even breaths sounded too loud. Another man, older and missing half his fingers from an old skirmish, adjusted the strap of his mail shirt and said that it would be a long night. The younger one beside him nodded, though he could not stop his hands from shaking. The sound came again, closer now. Not faster, just clearer, like a wave that knew exactly where to break. In the great hall, the steward was already awake. He sat at the long table with a single candle, its light bending across the wax-sealed documents and cups of cold ale left from the night before. The sound of the drums had reached him too, though he pretended not to hear at first. He had known this moment would come. The scouts had spoken of movement on the horizon for days. Still, the noise made him uneasy. It was not the rhythm itself, but what it carried, the certainty that something was waiting out there in the dark, just beyond sight. He rose slowly, joints creaking, and walked to the window slit. The cold air touched his face. Boom. He closed his eyes and whispered to the night that they had been given one more chance to prepare. In the chapel, where a single lamp burned before the altar, the priest knelt. He had not slept. The talk of war had spread through the castle like smoke that clings to everything it touches. But this sound felt different. The drums were not just a warning. They were a declaration, a heartbeat meant to stir fear into the bones of the faithful. He could imagine the men who beat them hooded, tired, hands raw from the cords that stretched across the skins. Somewhere out there, hundreds of them, all part of one vast body of intent. He crossed himself and whispered the same prayer over and over until his voice failed him. The hours that followed stretched like wet parchment. The rhythm of the drums stayed constant, unhurried, patient. The people inside the walls began to move quietly through the corridors, gathering what they could, saying little. Children clung to their mothers, who shushed them without words. A few men carried buckets to the well, filling them to the brim. The echo of iron against stone, ringing sharp between the low thuds from outside. Every sound inside the castle now seemed to answer the rhythm beyond the walls. The scrape of boots, the clink of chains, the flutter of banners in the cold errol of it was swallowed by the steady heartbeat of the drums. Toward dawn, a thin mist crept in from the river, curling around the base of the walls. the sound of the drums softened, as if the fog itself had muffled them. Some dared to hope they had stopped altogether. A young boy, the son of a blacksmith, climbed the narrow stairs to the parapet. Squinting into the grey, he saw nothing at first, only the pale shapes of trees and the sheen of dew on the stones. Then, as the wind shifted, he saw a flicker, a torch, then another. The fog thinned, revealing a line of faint red sparks stretching far beyond what the eye could count. The boy's stomach turned cold. He ducked back down and whispered to the guard beside him, who didn't answer. The man's jaw was set, eyes locked on the horizon. Inside, the cook began to boil what little grain was left, not because anyone was hungry, but because the act of doing anything kept her from shaking. The sound of the bubbling pot filled the silence between the distant booms, and for a moment it almost felt normal, almost safe. But the illusion never lasted long. The drums always returned, sometimes soft and far away, sometimes sudden and close, as if the enemy was toying with the space between noise and silence. It was a language everyone understood, though none could speak it. The lord of the castle appeared at last, dressed not in armor but in a heavy cloak. His face was pale in the torchlight as he walked through the hall, speaking to no one. He climbed to the ramparts alone and stood there, watching the fog breathe against the moat. The sound rolled in waves across the fields, deeper now, heavier, a promise of what was to come. He closed his eyes and listened, not as a warrior, but as a man who had built walls and filled them with lives that would soon be tested. Behind him, the first light of dawn touched the sky, a dull smear of grey against the blackness. He whispered something that the wind carried away, something that sounded like a name. By morning, the drums fell silent. The castle breathed again, but it was the kind of breath that comes after a held note, not the end of a song. The silence was not relief. It was anticipation, stretched thin across the battlements and the courtyards, across the faces of those who waited for the next sound. The first light revealed what the night had hidden. In the fields beyond the moat, the grass was trampled flat in wide circles. Smoke rose from small fires in the distance, faint trails that twisted into the pale sky. The siege had begun, though no one yet dared to say it aloud. And so the castle stood, caught between the memory of the drums and the silence that followed. Inside its walls, the people whispered of omens and curses, of saints and signs. But the truth was simpler. The sound had done its work. It had entered their bones, slowed their hearts, and filled the spaces where courage used to live. The night before had been fear's quiet rehearsal. The first drums were its opening act. The moment stretched like a held breath. The silence after the first drums was almost worse than the sound itself, because it left the defenders suspended between what they had heard and what they could imagine. Every man on the battlements pressed forward, peering through the thin veil of mist. They could see now the faint shapes of the enemy, shadows moving in rhythm, torches flickering as if alive, ranks forming in the wet grass. The lines were too far away to see faces, too distant to hear words, but the rhythm of their steps was enough. It carried a message that every soldier inside the walls understood instinctively. They were coming. They were many, and nothing inside these walls could stop the first shock of their arrival. Inside the castle, life moved in careful, measured gestures. The women and children who had been huddled near the hearth whispered prayers, eyes wide and hands clasped tightly. They moved with slow deliberation, carrying water, blankets, and small possessions to the chambers below, never speaking more than a breath above silence. Even the sound of their footsteps seemed loud against the vast quiet that had settled after the drums. Every movement was exaggerated, felt by the walls themselves. The stone seemed to shiver underfoot, echoing the anxiety in the hearts of those who walked upon it. The soldiers, meanwhile, had begun their preparations anew. Arrows were checked, bowstrings tightened, and armor polished, not for shine but for reassurance, a reminder that metal could protect even if courage failed. Some paced, unable to stand still, hands twitching toward weapons. Others stood rigid, staring over the edge of the parapets at the line of shadows that edged closer with each heartbeat. The rhythm of the enemy, no longer merely a drumbeat, but a steady cadence of intent, pressed against them, whispering that the coming hours would belong not to patience but to endurance. In the tower, the watchmen rotated positions silently. Their eyes had become attuned to the fog, scanning it for the first sign of movement. Each time the mist swirled or shifted, they tensed, sure that it carried the enemy closer. One of them, younger and new to the post, pressed his hand against the cold stone and shivered. He tried to imagine the drums as nothing more than distant thunder, but the vibration in the ground told him otherwise. He was not ready to hear what the rest of the day would bring. Meanwhile, the lord of the castle moved from rampart to rampart, stopping at each post to measure the resolve of the men stationed there. He did not speak much. His voice was hoarse from the night's quiet orders, and words now would have been wasted. Instead, he raised a hand, pointing to a distant shape, a faint shimmer of steel that glinted through the mist. The soldiers understood. Their hands gripped their weapons tighter. Their hearts beat faster. They waited. The drums, now faintly audible again, reminded them that waiting would not last long. The first horn from the enemy echoed across the field, low and mournful, and answered the beat of the drums. It was a sound designed to cut through courage and replace it with calculation, to make each heartbeat feel like a warning. Inside the castle, the priests muttered prayers under their breath, their lips moving so fast the words nearly vanished in the air. The servants moved quickly, carrying buckets and fetching water for those who might need it for more than thirst. Even the dogs seemed to understand that nothing good would come from the open gates today. Their barking had turned into low growls, and they pressed their bodies against walls and feet, seeking comfort that the walls themselves could not provide. Time passed slowly, each second stretched by anticipation. The mist began to lift slightly, revealing the enemy's first true movements. Siege towers, barely more than shapes in the grey, were rolled forward carefully by men who had trained their bodies to obey rhythm above reason. They moved with discipline, each step in concert with the others, each beat of the drums guiding them forward like a shepherd guiding a flock. The defenders could see now that the enemy was no longer distant shadows, but a living, coordinated force, and the tension inside the castle became almost unbearable. From the highest wall, the young boy who had first spotted the flicker of torches pointed it out to the captain of the archers. The older man's eyes narrowed. He squinted through the morning haze, measuring distance, estimating range. He felt the same tightening in his chest he had always felt before battle. Fear. Yes, but also that peculiar clarity that comes when every sense is sharpened to an almost painful edge. The first arrow might fly in moments. The first shout might tear the morning apart. And all the while, the drums kept beating, a constant reminder that the enemy's focus was unyielding, precise, and deliberate. Inside the castle, whispers turned into quiet, shared glances. Mothers held children tighter. The younger soldiers bit the inside of their cheeks to keep from crying out. Even the old men who had been present for countless sieges found themselves standing straighter, their hands resting on weapons they had carried for decades. The drums had done their work. They had reminded every living thing inside the walls of vulnerability, of mortality, of the invisible line between waiting and facing. And then came the first arrow. It hissed through the mist, struck stone near the outer gate, and fell with a clatter that seemed louder than the drums themselves. Another followed, and another, each one a whispered promise of what would follow. The soldiers responded with calm efficiency born from training and fear, raising bows, readying crossbows, signaling for volleys to be prepared. The lord of the castle remained on the rampart, watching, listening, letting the first warning shots pass without panic, though his eyes flicked constantly to the enemy lines. The siege had become real, tactile, and inevitable. The rhythm of the drums had led them here, through the mist, into the pounding heart of the morning. The men and women within the walls adjusted, breathing through the tension, learning to live with the constant vibration of drums, the distant murmur of movement, and the first taste of danger pressing at their gates. The castle, for all its stone and iron, had never felt more fragile, and yet, in that fragility, in that suspended moment between drumbeat and arrow, something remarkable took shape. The quiet, stubborn, human will to endure. By midday, the fog had lifted completely, revealing the enemy's encampment in full. Flags snapped faintly in the wind. Men moved with precise efficiency, guided by drum and command. Siege engines, towering and ominous, began their slow approach toward the castle walls. Each thud from the drums now seemed synchronized with the soldiers' movements, a language of power that the defenders could feel in their bones. They knew the rhythm would not stop, would not pause for mercy or consideration. It was a reminder that history would be made today in fear, sweat, and stone. The castle itself responded in kind. Soldiers moved like one organism, raising arrows, adjusting positions, checking armor, Servants carried supplies silently through corridors. The priest remained in the chapel, hands clasped, lips moving prayers too soft to hear. Every heartbeat within the walls was amplified by the pounding drums outside, turning simple anticipation into a symphony of dread and discipline. Even the animals, the dogs, and the horses, seemed caught in the rhythm, stamping and shivering with it, ears pricked for sounds humans had not yet noticed. And then, suddenly, the drums changed. They split, as if different sections of the enemy were speaking in separate voices. One rhythm rolled like distant thunder, another was sharp and staccato, another soft, almost playful. The castle's defenders could not understand the meaning, but the effect was immediate. The soldiers on the walls tightened grips on weapons. Arrows were notched more carefully, armor checked again, shields adjusted. Each sound carried a command to their instincts. Be alert, be fast, be precise. Every living thing inside the walls felt it. Every breath seemed measured against it. The first siege tower reached the base of the walls, its wheels groaning against the mud. Men inside the castle tensed, bodies leaning over battlements, eyes locked on the lumbering silhouette. The drums now seemed to merge into a single, overwhelming pulse, a heartbeat that filled the air, the walls, and the very ground beneath them. It was as if the enemy had given the morning a voice, and that voice was relentless. Inside the castle, hearts beat in echo of it, a chorus of fear, preparation, and awareness. And in that moment, as the first shadow of the enemy pressed against the outer gate, the castle stood alive. Every stone, every timber, every breath inside its walls had been tuned to the rhythm of drums, to the warning and threat they carried, and to the terrible, exhilarating realization that the night before was over. The first drums had done their work. They had shaken the mind, filled the bones, and prepared every living thing inside for what the day would demand: vigilance, courage, and the endurance to survive the terrifying sounds of a medieval castle under siege. The first arrows came with a whisper, almost unnoticed against the background of the drums and the restless wind. They arched through the pale morning light, black silhouettes against the grey sky, and landed with soft thuds that spoke louder than any shout. Inside the castle, the sound startled no one who had spent the night listening to the drums, though it carried its own kind of terror. Men flinched, gripping weapons more tightly, their fingers slick with sweat despite the chill. The archers on the walls drew their bows instinctively, eyes scanning the field for the movement that had released those first deadly shafts. The arrows were scattered, probing, testing the defenses rather than striking with full force. One struck a shield, splintering wood and sending the fragment clattering across the battlement. Another hit a stone, bouncing harmlessly, and yet it made a sound that seemed to echo in every corridor of the castle. A young soldier in the corner of the tower cried out when an arrow clanged against the iron of a gate, the vibration running through the stone and into his bones. The captain of archers hushed him with a glance, voice low, almost gentle, reminding him to breathe and watch. Fear could be contained, panic could not. The defenders began to respond. Arrows were notched quickly, fingers tightening round bowstrings, hands steady despite shaking. Each release sent another projectile into the mist beyond the walls. Another whisper, cutting through the distance between the two forces. There was no celebration in these first shots, only the quiet rhythm of survival. See, aim, release, draw, repeat. It was the sound of human determination against the pulse of the enemy's drums. Each strike a silent counterpoint to the vast, unyielding rhythm that had announced the siege. In the courtyard, the servants pressed against the walls, peeking from behind barrels and doorways. They could hear the faint whistle of arrows flying overhead, the soft impact of some against stone, the muffled crash when one landed on a roof. Children huddled close to their mothers, eyes wide, ears straining. The animals, still tense from the night before, reacted to each new sound. Horses stamped, dogs barked in warning, and even the pigeons took flight, cooing wildly as they vanished into the sky. Every creature in the castle felt the beginning of battle. Every living thing had heard the first arrows and understood that there would be no return to normalcy until the sun had fallen again. On the battlements, the archers moved like dancers in a silent ballet. Each knew his position, his role, the weight of every arrow as it pressed against his fingers. The young ones hesitated for only a heartbeat, their eyes wide with fear, then released, sending arrows toward shapes in the mist. Older men leaned over the parapets, aiming with eyes narrowed, breath steady. hearts thudding in unison with the pulse of the drums still echoing from beyond the trees. Each arrow that flew was more than weaponry. It was communication, reassurance, defiance. It said to the enemy, "We are here. We endure. You will not break us easily." Inside the keep, the lord of the castle moved among his men. He spoke softly, giving no speeches, only instructions that could be executed in silence. One man needed his armor tightened. Another required a shield repositioned. The lord touched the young soldier whose first arrow had faltered, murmuring words of encouragement. Courage was a fragile thing, he knew, but necessary. Without it, no wall could hold. Without it, the drums and the arrows beyond the gate would have conquered the castle before the first fight had truly begun. The first arrows continued to fall in waves. Some struck stone or iron, harmless in themselves, but enough to remind the defenders of the enemy's reach. Others found flesh, and each time the sound of a body hitting the ground echoed painfully in the courtyard. The screams that followed were muffled but unmistakable, carried along corridors and up stairwells. The castle had not yet surrendered to chaos, but it had begun to taste it. The air seemed heavier, thicker, as if each arrow carried not just a shaft of wood and iron, but a piece of fear itself. Even the silence between the volleys was alive. Soldiers leaned over battlements, listening for the faint rustle of movement, the whisper of another arrow knocked, the subtle shift of ground beyond the walls. The rhythm of the enemy's drums had not stopped. It had only adapted, slower now, synchronized with the release of arrows and the creeping advance of siege towers. The pulse of battle was beginning, measured and deliberate, filling the valley and pressing into the hearts of all who waited behind the stone walls. In the kitchens, a pot tipped over, spilling water onto the floor. The splash sounded impossibly loud in the tense quiet that followed a volley. A cook muttered a curse, bending to lift it again, hands trembling. Other servants held their breath as the walls rang with a new volley of arrows, each one striking with a hollow thud. Even the stone itself seemed to resonate with the sound, amplifying it through the hallways and staircases. Every corner of the castle was alive with the vibrations of conflict, though no one had yet raised a sword in anger. The first casualties were carried down the narrow stairways into the infirmary. There, the wounded were laid on straw mats, moaning softly. The priests and healers worked quickly, moving hands over flesh and armor, binding wounds with strips of linen, whispering prayers that were as much for courage as for healing. The moans, the prayers, the soft scrape of bandages, they mixed with the whistling of the arrows above. A chorus of human endurance pressed against the growing threat beyond the walls. Outside, the enemy's approach continued, a tide of dark shapes advancing steadily. The drums still pulsed, guiding the soldiers, telling them when to stop, when to move, when to fire. The first arrows were meant not only to test the castle's defenses, but to intimidate, to condition the men inside, to make them anticipate the next wave of attack. It was psychological as much as physical. Every archer, every soldier, every breath of those defending the walls was now synchronized with the rhythm, locked into the cadence of fear and focus. The mist began to swirl again, hiding the enemy from sight, but not from the senses of the defenders. Every sound became significant, the twang of a bootstring, the shuffle of boots on the mud, the distant clash of iron as men tested their weapons. Soldiers whispered to one another in barely audible tones, giving warnings and advice, checking positions. The youngest trembled, but the older men leaned close, guiding hands to bows, adjusting posture, reminding them that the arrows they shot were more than just wood and iron, they were survival. By midday, the enemy had positioned their first small groups within range of the walls. The rhythm of their drums accelerated, matched now by the firing of crossbows and the soft, deadly whistle of arrows flying over the ramparts. The castle's archers returned fire in careful volleys, each arrow finding stone, shield, or sometimes flesh, though luck and skill balanced thinly between defense and death. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the exchange, a living thing bearing the weight of every heartbeat and every shaft that found its mark. And still, despite all the noise, the fear, the first blood spilled on stone, the castle endured. Every corner, every tower held someone standing, ready, watching. The women and children were sheltered in the lower chambers, whispering prayers and holding hands. The priests murmured blessings. The soldiers on the walls drew, fired, and reloaded, their bodies moving in a rhythm dictated by necessity and the echo of enemy drums. The first arrows had come, but they were only the beginning. The castle had tasted battle. The rhythm of survival had begun. The pulse of the enemy drums, the whistle of flying arrows, the soft thud of projectiles hitting stone, and the quiet determination of those defending it all became a single, intricate soundscape. And though the sun hung low in the sky and the mist began to lift fully, nothing would feel safe again. Not until the siege ended, if it ever did. The first arrows had opened the day, and in their wake, the castle learned to move as one, to breathe as one, to endure as one. The sound of war had begun, and every living thing inside the walls listened, waited, and prepared for what the next moment might demand. The sun had risen higher now, pale and colorless, casting weak light over the battlefield beyond the walls. The mist that had clung stubbornly to the ground slowly began to lift, revealing the first true shapes of the enemy's siege engines. The towers moved with a slow, deliberate patience, their wheels sinking slightly into the wet soil with every push. Men beyond the walls strained at the ropes, leaning into the weight of wood and iron, muscles quivering with effort. The drums rolled again, steady and relentless, a heartbeat for the vast bodies laboring under the heavy towers. The rhythm filled the air and pressed into the castle itself, vibrating through stone and timber alike. On the battlements, the soldiers watched with taut nerves. Each siege tower that appeared over the field was a monolith of threat, and the men could feel the weight of its presence even before it reached the walls. The first of the towers creaked as it rolled forward, its wheels grinding into the sodden earth, sending tremors up the ground. The sound was deep, resonant, almost musical in its menace, a chorus of labor and inevitability. Arrows and bolts had little effect on these massive constructions, and yet the defenders aimed carefully, striking the ropes, the wheels, anything that might slow the approach. Every projectile that struck the towers or the men hauling them caused a ripple of sound through the walls, a mixture of impact and triumph, of fear and resistance. Inside the castle, the courtyards hummed with activity. Soldiers checked their armor again, adjusting plates, tightening straps, testing bows. The smiths worked quickly, maintaining the few crossbows and shortbows that had been pressed into service. Servants carried water for the men, knowing that thirst would come long before hunger, that fatigue would claim the unwary if they were not careful. Women and children remained in the lower chambers, clinging together, whispering prayers that merged with the soft scrape of boots on stone and the faint clatter of armor. Every sound inside the walls became part of the rhythm of survival, synchronized unconsciously with the relentless pulse of the drums and the heavy creak of the siege towers beyond. The first tower reached the moat. Its approach had been cautious, deliberate, every movement guided by experience and strength. Men leaned against ropes, their hands raw, their feet slipping in the mud, yet the structure moved forward as if alive. The defenders on the wall waited, their arrows. The lord of the castle gave a silent command, and men shifted positions, preparing for the inevitable contact. Stones had been piled along the battlements, ready to be rolled down onto anything that reached the walls. Boiling oil had been heated, ready to pour onto the first who dared breach the gate. Archers aimed not just at the towers but at every man moving with them, seeking to disrupt rhythm, delay the inevitable. The castle itself seemed to breathe in preparation, every stone, every timber, every living being, aware that the siege was no longer distant. It was upon them. Hours passed. The towers moved slowly but steadily. The defenders worked tirelessly, adjusting, shooting, shouting warnings, bracing for impact. The drums, ever present, rolled across the field, each beat synchronizing the enemy's efforts, each thump pressing upon the walls and the hearts of those inside. The rhythm became almost hypnotic, a constant reminder that the siege would not end until the castle surrendered or the sun fell behind the horizon. In the lower chambers, mothers held children close, servants whispered words of courage. Every sound of battle, the hiss of arrows, the groan of timber, the soft whine of rope under strain, was amplified by fear. Yet even amidst terror, human instinct persisted. Each person did what they could, followed the rhythm of survival, prepared for the moment when the first tower might reach the walls, and the fight would be at their very feet. The first tower pressed against the wall at last, its wheels splintering the edge of stone slightly, groaning under weight. Men leaned forward, bracing with iron-tipped pikes to push it back, arrows flying into the sides, rocks rolling onto its massive frame. The drums thundered, urging the enemy onward, and the castle answered with every means it had: fire, stone, arrow, and the determination to endure. The battle had truly begun, though no swords had yet clashed. The siege towers were a living, breathing threat, and the castle responded in kind, alive with motion, sound, and the quiet, stubborn courage of all who refused to yield. Even now, as the morning moved toward midday, the rhythm of attack and defense continued, a slow, unrelenting pulse that filled every moment. Every soldier, every servant, every child and mother, every priest and healer was caught in the tide of anticipation and fear. The siege towers advanced inch by inch, and the castle held, every stone and every heartbeat aligned in the shared determination to survive. The drums beyond the walls continued their relentless cadence, carrying the message that the enemy was patient, organized, and merciless. And still, inside the walls, life moved in careful, deliberate rhythm, every action a counterpoint to the enormous, lumbering threat pressing ever closer. The castle would endure, that much was certain. The siege towers would strike, the arrows would fall, and the drums would echo. But within these walls, the pulse of human courage, patience, and quiet defiance had begun to take hold. And though the sound of battle was only beginning, the defenders had already learned the rhythm of survival, a slow, deliberate beat that would carry them through the first day of the siege. By late afternoon, the sun had climbed high enough to cast long, pale shadows across the courtyard. Yet the air remained thick with tension and the memory of the morning's drums and arrows. The siege towers had pressed ever closer, relentless in their approach, groaning with weight and straining against ropes slick with mud and sweat. Every vibration carried across the walls into the bones of the defenders, a steady reminder that the enemy was patient and methodical. The castle, for all its stone and timber, now felt alive with anticipation, every heartbeat inside echoing the rhythm of the advancing threat outside. The first impact came without fanfare. One tower, a massive structure of wood, reinforced with iron, pressed against the outer gate, wheels grinding, ropes creaking. Men behind it pushed with all their strength, their bodies bent under the labor, faces pale and streaked with dirt and sweat. The castle's defenders had prepared for this moment for hours, but nothing could truly prepare a soul for the physical sensation of a siege tower pressing against the gates. Stone vibrated underfoot, doors rattled in their hinges, and a low, ominous groan filled the air. The sound was terrible and intimate, a mix of wood, iron, and human exertion, and every soldier on the wall could feel it reverberate through their very bones. Arrows flew, volley after volley, cutting into the men hauling the tower, but the sheer weight and momentum of the machine carried it forward. Rocks and stones were dropped from the battlements, striking wood and rope with resounding cracks. Some fell harmlessly, others pierced shields or wounded men, eliciting cries of pain that echoed across the courtyard. The drums from beyond the walls rolled on, each beat a call to endurance, a pulse that synchronized the movements of the enemy and tested the resolve of those defending the castle. It was a sound that invaded minds, made muscles tighten, hearts beat faster, and fear mingle with determination. Inside the courtyard, servants moved quietly, carrying water and bandages to where they might be needed. Eyes wide, breaths shallow, mothers clutched children to their chests, whispering reassurances even as they felt the tremor of the siege through the stone beneath them. Priests murmured prayers under their breath, their words trembling with urgency. Every sound, every vibration, every distant cry became part of the day's rhythm, blending with the drumbeat and the groan of wood and iron to create a symphony of tension that filled every corner of the castle. The first cracks began to appear along the gate's reinforced beams. Splinters flew as the tower's wheels pressed and twisted, as if the structure itself was testing the strength of stone and timber alike. The defenders on the walls leaned into their work, dropping boiling oil onto the advancing tower, hurling rocks with precision, stabbing at anyone who came close. Each action produced sound metal clashing against wood, shouts, the hiss of heated oil striking the tower, but it was all swallowed by the omnipresent rhythm of the drums beyond the field. The pulse of the siege outside had become a constant companion, guiding both attackers and defenders, a cruel metronome that could not be silenced. The first defenders fell. One soldier, leaning too far over the battlement to strike a rope, was struck by a thrown rock, tumbling backward into the courtyard with a dull thud. Another cried out as a splinter from the gate struck his arm, drawing blood. The screams and groans added layers to the symphony of the castle, a soundtrack of endurance pressed against fear. Every person inside the walls felt it. the vulnerability of stone, the fragility of human flesh, and yet the stubborn will to resist that bound them together in a silent pact. The lord of the castle moved from post to post, eyes sharp, body tense but controlled. He adjusted positions, whispered commands, and offered hands to steady those whose courage wavered. His presence was calm, though his heart raced with the same pulse that filled the battlements, synchronized with the approaching enemy. He had built this castle with walls, towers, and gates, but he knew now that their greatest strength lay not in stone and timber, but in the rhythm of human action, the steady, deliberate, practiced movements of soldiers, servants, and civilians alike, all working together in response to the siege. By late afternoon, the first breach was imminent. The gate, strained and splintered, began to yield under the weight and pressure of the siege tower. Men shouted warnings, arrows were loosed with precision, and rocks continued to rain down. Yet the wooden behemoth creaked forward with unstoppable inevitability. The drums beyond the walls thundered louder now, as if urging the tower onward, each beat resonating through the castle, pressing into minds and bodies alike. It was impossible to escape the sound, and it became almost tactile, like standing in the path of a storm that had yet to fully arrive. Inside the castle, the tension was nearly unbearable. Every defender moved with precise intent, muscles coiled, senses sharpened. Archers adjusted their aim constantly, soldiers leaned against the gates to brace them, and priests whispered blessings in unison with the rhythm of the drums. Even those who could do nothing felt the impact in their bones, a vibration that communicated both danger and the need for vigilance. The castle was alive with fear, courage, and anticipation, and every heartbeat inside matched the pulse of the advancing siege. The first breach happened quietly, almost imperceptibly. A beam gave way under the relentless pressure, splintering with a sharp crack that cut through the air. Soldiers leaned in, pushing against it with whatever strength they could muster. Arrows and stones struck with renewed force, but the tower had found a gap, a weakness in the gate's defense, and it pressed onward. The drums outside adapted, quickening slightly as if celebrating the minor victory. Their rhythm now part encouragement, part warning, part omnipresent reminder that the battle was no longer a distant threat, it was here. Panic tried to ripple through the castle, but it was suppressed by training, by necessity, and by a collective will to survive. Every hand was at work, soldiers reinforcing the gate, archers loosing arrows, servants carrying supplies, children whispering prayers, priests murmuring blessings. Every sound was magnified, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. The castle had become a living organism, its pulse synchronized with the siege towers pressing against its gates, its defenses alive with the rhythm of resistance. Even as the first breach widened, the defenders adapted. Stones were dropped directly onto the wheels, ropes were cut when possible, and men leaped onto the advancing tower whenever chance allowed, stabbing, striking, and pulling at the structure in desperate attempts to halt its advance. The first real clashes of flesh and wood, of human determination against the unyielding weight of siege, filled the air with sounds of struggle, grunts, cries, splintering wood, and the constant drumbeat outside, a cruel metronome guiding both sides. And yet, despite every effort, the breach widened, slowly but inevitably. The walls shook, the battlements trembled, and the castle itself seemed to hold its breath. The first true test of endurance had arrived, and the defenders responded with a calm born of terror. Fear pressed into action, panic molded into precision. The rhythm of survival had taken hold completely, and every living thing inside the walls moved in time with it. The first breach was a warning, a promise, and a challenge all at once. The castle could withstand, but only if every soul within it matched the pulse of battle. The day wore on. Sunlight faded to a pale grey as shadows lengthened across the courtyard. The first breach had grown, yet the defenders held firm. Every arrow loosed, every stone hurled, every drop of boiling oil poured onto the siege tower. The drums beyond the walls continued their relentless cadence, each beat pressing into mind and body, binding fear and courage into a single, taut thread. The castle endured, alive with the rhythm of survival, every heartbeat synchronized with the pulse of the approaching threat. As dusk approached, the first cauldron was tilted carefully forward. The liquid poured slowly, deliberately, cascading over the edge of the battlement in a shining ribbon of death. It struck the top of the siege tower, coating it in a glistening film that caught the light of nearby torches. The rain hissed against it, but the oil was thick, clinging to wood and rope. The second cauldron followed, its contents pouring in a steady stream, and the smell rose, sharp, bitter, unforgettable. Then came the spark. A single torch was dropped, tumbling end over end through the air, until it struck the oil-soaked wood below. For an instant, there was nothing, only the faint glow of the torch against wet darkness. Then the tower erupted in flame. The fire spread fast, racing along the ropes, devouring the pitch-soaked boards, leaping to every surface it touched. The rain sizzled uselessly against it. The air filled with the roar of fire and the screams of men caught too close. The defenders stepped back, shielding their faces from the heat, their eyes reflecting the inferno below. For a brief moment, the night was as bright as day. Flames climbed high, licking the side of the wall, casting wild shadows across the courtyard. The drums faltered for the first time, their steady rhythm broken by confusion. The defenders did not cheer. They only watched in silence, their faces blank, their hearts pounding with a mix of triumph and horror. The fire was victory, yes, but it was also death, a cruel, burning reminder of what survival cost. As the tower burned, the rain began to fall harder, and the smoke billowed thick, curling upward in grey plumes that mixed with the mist. The heat was oppressive, heavy, almost solid. The air shimmered with it, carrying the smell of scorched wood and oil and flesh. The defenders stood still, their weapons ready, their minds numb, waiting for the next sound, the next sign, the next movement in this strange, endless rhythm of destruction and endurance. But the siege was not over. Even as one tower burned, others moved forward, the drums finding their rhythm again, slower now, but still steady, still relentless. The night was far from finished, and the castle knew it. The shouts outside the wall had shifted in tone. Moments ago, there was that desperate, furious rhythm of men in pain, that rolling roar of shock as the oil poured and burned. Now, it was quieter, thick, uneven breathing through the fog, boots dragging on mud, men pulling back. A few voices still rose in agony, muffled beneath helmets, or buried under the smoke that drifted upward, like a ghost escaping the stone. From the ramparts, the defenders stood motionless, peering through the wavering heat, not quite ready to believe the assault was over. The torches below threw trembling patches of orange light across the broken ground, showing shapes that barely moved. The remains of ladders half collapsed, and the faint, stuttering glow of fires catching on oil-soaked grass. The air smelled of iron and ash, but beneath it was something more human: fear, sweat, and that heavy, metallic sweetness that follows battle. No one spoke at first. There was no cheer of victory, no release of breath, just the quiet scraping of armor as men shifted their weight, waiting for someone else to say it first. Then a boy not yet 15 laughed in disbelief. It was a sharp sound, too high, almost a gasp, and it broke whatever trance held them. A few others let out sighs, muttered prayers, or simply leaned against the cold stone and stared out into the fog. The oil pots had done their work. The ladders that had reached the wall were now black skeletons, twisted and smoking. Those who tried to climb were either gone or dragging themselves away through the mud. The silence that followed was uneasy, as if the castle itself was listening, suspicious that the night had gone too quiet too soon. A veteran named Edric, his beard grey and matted with soot, leaned over the parapet and spat into the dark. "They'll come again," he murmured, mostly to himself, but those near him heard. His tone carried no emotion, neither triumph nor dread, just weary certainty. In a siege, one attack was never the last. The men beside him nodded, and for a moment the only sound was the low moan of wind pushing against the flag above. It flapped weakly, its edges scorched by sparks from the oil fire below. Further down the wall, a monk who had taken up a bow tried to steady his hands. He had never fired one before this siege. His fingers were blistered, his arms sore, but he had stayed because the abbots said their prayers would protect them. Now, seeing the bodies below, he wondered if prayers or arrows made any real difference. He whispered to himself anyway, a chant half remembered, hoping the sound alone would steady him. Inside the courtyard, a few women moved quietly among the defenders. They carried buckets of water and strips of cloth, not to wash away blood they had long given up on, that but to soothe burns and wipe soot from faces. One of them, young and calm-faced, paused beside a guard sitting on a fallen beam. His gauntlet still smoked from the oil he had poured, and his eyes were unfocused. She touched his shoulder lightly, and he flinched as if struck. He muttered something she couldn't understand. Perhaps a prayer or the name of someone gone. She didn't ask. Instead, she pressed a damp cloth into his hands and moved on. The castle's great bell had not rung during the attack. It hung in the tower above them, dark and still, as if it, too, were conserving its strength. Only the wind moved it, making a faint metallic hum that carried over the walls. Beyond, the forest and fields were invisible, now swallowed by fog. The enemy campfires, once a ring of dull orange dots, had faded to faint embers. Somewhere out there, across the mist, the survivors were regrouping, whispering in the dark. In the gatehouse, the captain conferred with his sergeant. Their voices were low but firm, weighed down by exhaustion. They spoke of water, of oil reserves, of how many arrows were left. The answer was always the same: less than they needed. A scribe, ink-stained and pale, sat nearby, scratching figures into a ledger that would never leave the castle. He didn't know why he still wrote them down. Perhaps it was habit. Perhaps a man clings to order even when the world outside burns. Then came a sound that froze every breath. Not loud, not near, but strange, one deep thud. Then another, like a distant heartbeat beneath the earth. The drums again, slower this time, deliberate. The men on the wall turned their heads toward the dark, and for a long moment, no one moved. The rhythm continued, steady and patient, as if reminding the defenders that this was far from over. A crow cried somewhere above, startled by the echo, and flew toward the east, its wings slicing through the mist. Edric muttered, "They're testing us." Another soldier, younger and less sure, asked, "What for?" Edric gave no answer. He didn't need to. The meaning was clear: they wanted the castle to remember fear. The first assault might have failed, but the next would come with heavier breath and sharper steel. Siege was a game of patience and terror, of sounds that broke sleep and silences that lasted too long. Hours passed that felt like minutes. The men rotated shifts, trading places on the wall, though no one truly slept. In the barracks, a handful of archers lay with their bows beside them, half dreaming, listening to the faint creak of timbers settling, the whisper of wind through arrow slits, and every so often, the dull beat of those drums in the distance. The rhythm had become part of the night now, something constant and inescapable, like the pulse of the world beyond the walls. As dawn began to brush the edge of the horizon, the fog shifted to a pale gold. Smoke rose in slow curls from the battlefield, revealing what had been hidden. Blackened shapes lay across the ground, some still smoldering, others motionless in the grey light. The men on the wall turned their faces away, not from disgust, but from the simple, heavy truth of it. The first counterattack had worked, yes, but it had also taken something from them. The smell, the heat, the sight of it all left a mark deeper than fear. When the sun finally appeared, weak and pale, it revealed the castle as a living thing, wounded but standing. The banners hung torn and blackened, yet they still caught the wind. Inside the walls, life stirred again. The cook lit her fire, stirring thin broth. A blacksmith hammered at a bent helmet, the ringing sound echoing softly, a strangely comforting rhythm amid the ruin. Children peeked from doorways, wide-eyed but silent, sensing the weight that still hung in the air. In the chapel, the monk who had prayed through the night knelt before the altar. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady now. The sound of his chant rose and fell with the light. Outside, on the battlements, Edric watched the valley through a spy hole, eyes narrowed against the morning haze. He saw movement against shadows shifting beyond the tree line, too organized to be carrion birds, too many for scavengers. The enemy had not gone. He didn't call the alarm yet, not until he was certain. But deep inside, he knew the rhythm of the day had already begun. The first drums had been just the beginning, whisper before the storm. He straightened, adjusted his dented helm, and turned to the men beside him. "Eat what you can," he said quietly. "You'll need it." No one argued. The sound of spoons against metal bowls echoed softly through the courtyard, mingling with the faint heartbeat of drums returning in the far distance. And as the mist thickened once more around the walls, the castle seemed to draw in a breath of its own, preparing, in its ancient, stony silence, for whatever the next sound might bring. The sound came again, slower this time, more deliberate, like the turning of an ancient wheel. It was so deep that the air itself seemed to vibrate, a low moan that moved through the ground and up into the castle walls. The defenders leaned over the parapets, searching the dark, but the mist was too thick. The moonlight caught only a faint glimmer of movement, somewhere far beyond the motor shape. too large to be a man, too steady to be smoke. Then came the second noise, sharp and sudden, the snap of a rope releasing under strain. The sound echoed, then rolled into a hollow crash that seemed to shake the sky. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then something hit the ground outside the walls with a dull, heavy thud, scattering dirt and pebbles in a cloud that drifted up toward the ramparts. The first stone had missed, but not by far. The captain closed his eyes for a moment. Edric was right. The first stone sounded wrong, like thunder from a direction the world wasn't built for. It wasn't a crack in the sky, or a drumbeat from men. It was the earth itself being struck. The men near him stood frozen, gripping their weapons but not knowing what to do with them. He could not fight a sound. He could only wait for the next one. The next one came sooner than they expected. Another deep groan, another snap, another rush through the dark. This time the impact was louder, a shuddering roar as stone met wall. Chips of mortar burst outward in a spray of dust and grit. The sound rolled through the courtyard like a wave, rattling doors and windows, shaking soot from the rafters of the great hall. The people inside gasped and clutched at each other. A child began to cry, then was hushed by trembling hands. On the battlements, the men coughed through the dust, lowered the torches. The captain called, "Make them guess where to aim." The order spread, and one by one, the lights along the wall dimmed. The castle sank into partial darkness, its outline merging with the night. From below, the enemy would see only a silhouette, a shape of stone and shadow. The noises continued, slow and methodical. Each shot was followed by a pause, the winding of ropes, the creak of timber, the low chant of men working together in rhythm. The defenders began to sense the machine's tempo. There was something awful about it, something almost human in its repetition. It was as if the engine had lungs, drawing breath between each strike. After the fifth shot, the captain ordered the bell rung once, not for alarm, but as a signal to brace. The sound of it rolled through the castle, deep and resonant, steadying hearts that had begun to falter. The next stone struck the outer curtain wall. It didn't break through, but the shock of it made every man on the battlements flinch. Dust drifted down from the merlons like snow. Somewhere in the courtyard, a jar of oil tipped and shattered, releasing its sharp scent into the night. Between the strikes, the silence grew unbearable. Men found themselves listening for smaller things, the creak of the windlass being turned, the scrape of ropes tightening, even the sigh of the wind. Some prayed under their breath, others muttered jokes that no one laughed at. The night stretched on like a held breath. The monk climbed the tower steps with a lantern. The light swung in his hand, its glow trembling over the walls. He joined the captain, who stood staring into the dark. "They'll break through by dawn," the monk said softly. It wasn't fear in his voice, but something closer to sadness, as if he were naming an inevitability. The captain didn't answer. He was watching the dust rise from the base of the wall, faintly golden in the lantern light. "If they do," he said finally, "make sure the bell rings until it falls." Down below, the blacksmith and the cook worked side by side in the courtyard, reinforcing the inner gate with whatever they could find: barrels, beams, old carts. The sound of hammering echoed up through the keep, each strike a counterpoint to the enemy's rhythm beyond the walls. The smith's hammer fell in steady beats, as if he could match their tempo and somehow defy it. Some time past midnight, the wind turned. The fog lifted just enough for the men on the wall to see what they had only heard. A shadow loomed in the field, tall, angular, moving with a slow mechanical grace. It was not one machine, but several, their outlines swaying as they rolled forward, pushed by dozens of men. Their wheels were as high as a man's shoulders, their frames wrapped in hides to protect them from fire. For a moment, the moonlight caught the gleam of iron bolts and the curve of a great sling arm being wound back. The sight froze every word in every throat. The captain whispered trebuchets. The word fell like a prayer or a curse. The men watched as the engines halted just beyond the ditch. Then, almost tenderly, the operators raised torches to check the ropes. The light flickered against the wet hides, making the machines look alive like beasts breathing in the mist. Then, without warning, one of them fired. The arm swung forward with a speed that defied its size, and the great sling flung its burden into the air. It vanished against the night sky, invisible except for the rush of air it left behind. The impact came a second later, shaking the western tower. Stone dust rained down from the battlements. Somewhere below, a woman screamed, cut short by the next crash, and yet the captain did not flinch. His voice was low but steady. They're finding their range. That means they can see us now. Keep the fires low. The night became a slow rhythm of destruction. Creak, snap, rush, crash. Between each cycle, men caught their breath and counted heartbeats. The castle held, but every strike chipped away something more than stone. It wore down courage, inch by inch, until even silence felt dangerous. By the time the eastern sky began to pale, the engines stopped. The last stone fell short, rolling to a halt against the moat's edge with a hiss. Then there was nothing, no hammering, no creak of ropes, only the faint crackle of torches burning low. The men on the wall waited for another strike, but none came. The machines had gone still, as if satisfied. Dawn came thin and grey. The mist was gone now, and the field lay open before them. The defenders saw what the night had built to great trebuchets, black against the light, their arms poised like skeletal arms reaching for the sky. Beside them, smaller engines crouched low mangonels, catapults, and carts filled with stones. Smoke rose from the forges that had fed them. The ground was scarred with trenches, the enemy's lines drawn closer than before. The captain stared for a long time. He could hear the faint groan of timber settling, the soft hiss of cooling metal. The siege engines were still, but their presence filled the air like a heartbeat. Every man on the wall felt it, the weight of what was coming. The monk crossed himself and whispered, "They've built a forest of war." Edric grunted, "Aye, and it's only just waking." The captain said nothing. He turned his eyes toward the rising sun, pale and uncertain through the haze, and for a brief flickering moment he allowed himself to imagine that the warmth he felt was not the light of another day under siege, but something older, quieter, something that still remembered peace. Then the first hammer struck again in the distance. The morning begins, not with birdsong, but with the slow groan of something vast, awakening beyond the mist. At first it sounds almost alive, a deep wooden moan rising from the valley, followed by the heavy clack of gears and ropes tightening. The defenders, those still able to stand on the walls, freeze at the sound. No one speaks. It's not the clash of swords or the shout of men. It's mechanical, deliberate, slow, and they all know what it means. The siege engines are moving. The air feels thicker now, the kind of stillness that exists only when everyone is holding their breath. From the top of the parapet, one of the archers leans forward just enough to see over the merlon. Through them, shapes begin to shift, towering wooden silhouettes, lumbering forward with the help of ropes, beasts of war made by human hands. Someone whispers a prayer, another adjusts the strap of his quiver, though both know arrows will do little against those wooden giants. A low creak cuts through the damp air again, louder this time. The men below can feel it vibrate through the stones beneath their boots. Inside the courtyard, the garrison commander gives quiet orders, voice steady but soft, as if even he doesn't want to disturb whatever is coming. Buckets of water are placed near each gate, sandbags stacked. The wounded moved farther from the walls. Nobody runs, nobody shouts, but everything happens quickly, with that grim precision that only comes from people who already accepted what's about to happen. The first boulder comes without warning, a deep, whistling rush, then a sound like the world itself cracking open. The stone smashes into the outer curtain wall, tearing away mortar, showering showers of rock down on the men below. The echo rolls through the castle, deep and resonant, like thunder trapped inside a hollow mountain. Dust fills the air, thick and choking. For a moment, no one can see, only feel. The tremor underfoot, the sting of grit in the eyes, the ringing that follows destruction. Another sound builds in the distance, the creak of the throwing arm resetting, the groan of tension winding back through rope and timber. The men on the walls brace. Another rush, another explosion of stone and dust. The wall holds, but the rhythm has begun. Each strike follows a heartbeat. The air now trembles with it. Inside the great hall, the sound is worse. It travels through the flagstones, through the wooden beams, up into the bones of those who sit in silence there. Some of the women have taken to sitting with their hands pressed against their ears, though it does little good. Every impact shakes loose a little more of the castle's certainty. How many engines do they have? How long can the wall hold? What happens when it doesn't? The older ones say nothing. They've been through this before, or near enough to it, and they know the noise is part of the attack. The waiting, the rhythm, the endless anticipation. It breaks people down before the walls even fall. The masons notice it, exchange a look, but say nothing. Above them, the defenders keep firing arrows into the haze. not because they can see their targets, but because silence feels worse. The arrows make a faint hiss as they vanish into the mist, never to be seen again. The next boulder lands closer to the gatehouse. The impact throws several men backward, splintering a section of the parapet. One falls but catches himself on the edge, dangling for a moment over the drop, before another hauls him up. They both sit there, covered in dust, breathing hard, too stunned to speak. Around them, the castle seems to breathe too, the walls groaning, the timbers settling, as if the structure itself were alive and wounded. Down in the chapel, the priest has begun to sing quietly, a low chant that wavers with each new tremor. The candles flicker, their light bending in the drafts from the shaking doors. A few of the garrison's children huddle near the altar, eyes wide but faces strangely calm, as though even fear has grown tired. One little boy whispers to his mother that the walls sound like giants walking outside. She doesn't correct him. By midday, the air is full of dust and the faint scent of burnt wood. The heat from the bombardment, from the friction and the constant movement, seems to linger in the stone. Every man on the walls now moves slower, each step a little heavier. They're not just fighting the enemy anymore, they're fighting exhaustion, noise, and the slow erosion of courage. Somewhere near the western corner, one of the old men who once served as a stonemason is speaking softly to a young guard beside him, explaining how the castle was built, the thickness of the walls, the layers of limestone and mortar. He's not trying to reassure the boy, only to remind himself that there was once a time when stone meant safety. Then, a strange silence falls. The engines have stopped. The air, for the first time all morning, feels still. And then, through that silence, comes a new sound, a deep, rhythmic clatter of wheels on earth, closer than before. The commander orders everyone down from the walls. He knows what comes next. Inside the courtyard, men rush to move barrels, reinforce doors, reposition ladders. Outside, the air vibrates again. The sound of the next throw is lower, slower, heavier. Dust and shards rain down. Somewhere, a bell falls from its hook, clanging once as it hits the floor. No one speaks. They just look. They all understand what that light means. The sounds outside soften to the creak of wood cooling, the hiss of ropes loosening, the faint calls of distant men. Others begin to patch what they can, though they know the next day will bring more. Night falls quietly, almost tenderly. The fires are lit again, but smaller this time. The stores of fuel are running low. In the silence, the castle breathes like a living creature trying to rest after being beaten. The cracks in the walls are dark lines now, but for the moment, they're still holding. Up on the battlements, the stars are faint through the haze. A few men keep watch, eyes unfocused, more listening than looking. The valley below is quiet, but occasionally, the wind carries a sound, a laugh, a hammer's strike, the shifting of wheels. The engines are being prepared again, fed and tended like monstrous animals waiting for dawn. One guard leans against the cold stone and murmurs that he can still feel the vibrations through the wall. Another nods but doesn't answer. The sound is gone, but the memory of it lingers, a phantom pressure in the chest, a ringing deep in the ears, as though the castle itself still remembers each blow. And beneath all that, a deeper, quieter sound persists, the slow drip of water from somewhere unseen, falling rhythmically into a puddle below. It's small, almost insignificant, but to the sleepless, it becomes the measure of the night, one drop after another, as steady and inevitable as the passing of time. They will sleep, some of them. Others will sit with their backs to the wall, eyes closed but minds awake, waiting for the next sound, the creak, the whistle, the crash that will mark the return of the machines at dawn. The night holds its breath. Every sound seems magnified in the silence. The scrape of armor, the cough of a sentry, the whisper of wind slipping through cracks in the stone. Somewhere, a dog barks once, sharp and distant, then nothing. The castle feels smaller now, its walls closer, its air heavier. It has become not just a fortress but a container for fear, for the echoes of the day's violence that still pulse faintly through its bones. Inside the chapel, a few candles remain lit. Their small flames flicker against the uneven stone, making the saint's painted eyes seem alive, almost watchful. A soldier sits there with his helmet in his lap, staring not at the altar but at the floor, where dust has settled in pale lines between the flagstones. His lips move, but no sound comes out. He isn't praying, not really. He's mouthing the rhythm of the impacts from earlier, as if repeating them will make them predictable. harmless, part of a pattern he can control. Elsewhere, the garrison commander sits alone at a table strewn with torn maps and broken quills. The ink has dried into little pools where his hand once rested. His armor lies beside him, dented and dusted white from stone fragments. He runs a finger over one of the dents and pauses, as if reading a memory written into the metal. Outside, a faint tremor hums through the ground, so soft that only the wine in his cup stirs slightly. He looks up, waiting, but the tremor fades. Not yet morning. On the walls, the sentries have become shadows, their faces pale in the starlight, their eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. Some stand because sitting would mean sleep, and sleep feels dangerous, a kind of surrender. They talk quietly, not about the enemy, but about the world outside the siege. Rivers, wives, children, distant cities. They tell the same stories again and again, smoothing them out like worn coins until they almost shine. Each story is a small act of defiance, a way to prove that the world beyond the walls still exists. Below them, in the kitchens, the fire has long gone out. The smell of boiled grain lingers in the air, mixed with smoke and the faint tang of sweat and iron. A woman stirs a pot not because there's anything left to cook, but because the motion keeps her hands busy. The sound of the wooden spoon scraping against the pot's bottom is soft and rhythmic, almost comforting. She hums under her breath, an old song, though she can't remember where she learned it. Toward midnight, the wind shifts. The mist that clung to the valley all day begins to rise again, curling around the towers like slow breath. From the ramparts, one of the guards swears he hears the faint clatter of hooves, but when he leans out to look, there's only fog. He listens harder. A moment later, something heavy shifts far off in the dark, a deep wooden groan, followed by a splash, as if something massive rolled into the moat. He grips his spear tighter, but doesn't call out. The night feels fragile, and voices seem to break it too easily. In one of the lower chambers, the castle's stonemason lies awake on a straw mat. He can hear the walls settling above him, each tiny crack stretching with a sound like a sigh. He whispers to himself the way he once spoke to the stones while building, telling them to hold, to stay true, to remember their purpose. He imagines the castle listening, and for a moment, he almost believes it does. A sudden gust sweeps through the courtyard, scattering ashes from the cold fire pit. It rattles a loose shutter, sending a hollow tapping through the hallway. Someone stirs in the barracks, half dreaming. The sound blends with another, a slow, rhythmic thud from far away, so faint it might be imagined, but it repeats. And again, the engines are being wound. The first light of dawn hasn't yet reached the sky when the tremor returns. Stronger now. The guards on the walls exchange glances. One leans forward, his breath fogging the cold air. Through the mist, faint pinpricks of orange appear, torches moving in slow arcs, marking the shapes of men and machines. The enemy is awake again. The valley, moments ago still and pale, begins to hum with the low murmur of voices and the groan of wood under tension. The defenders rouse themselves. Buckles tighten, boots scrape against stone, shields are lifted. There is no speech, no shouted command, only the quiet efficiency of people who already know what to do. Inside the armory, a boy no older than 16 tries to fit an oversized helmet on his head. It slides down over his eyes, and a veteran wordlessly adjusts the strap for him. Neither smiles. The first boulder comes earlier than expected. It rips through the dawn air, shrieking like a wounded thing, and strikes the outer wall with a sound so deep it feels like the air itself folds inward. The impact knocks dust from every beam and sends a dozen birds bursting from the towers. The walls tremble. Somewhere, glass shatters. The defenders shout this time, not in fear but in raw instinct. Arrows fly, though most fall short. The sound of them, the hiss and clatter, fills the air for a few brief moments before being drowned. Again by the engines. Another throw, and another. The rhythm begins anew, faster, heavier. The castle shakes as if caught in the jaws of some enormous creature. In the kitchen passage, the same woman who had been stirring the empty pot sits with her back against the wall, hands over her ears. The sound comes through anyway. Each strike feels closer than the last. Her song has turned into a hum, trembling with each vibration, until it is no longer clear if she's comforting herself or simply mirroring the noise. Up on the battlements, a man collapses to his knees after a stone hits near his post. His ears ring so loudly he can no longer hear his own breathing. He looks around and sees the other men moving in silence, mouths open in what might be shouts. The world has gone mute, except for a deep, internal hum, as if the sound has moved inside him now. Hours pass like this, an endless series of impacts, shouts, dust, then brief silence, and then the cycle again. By midday, the sun is bright, but does nothing to lift the mood. The air tastes of chalk. The walls are pale with new scars, and the once smooth stones are jagged where the boulders struck. Even the shadows look tired. When the bombardment finally slows, the defenders don't cheer. They just stop moving, standing where they are, breathing through mouths dry with dust. The commander walks the wall, inspecting each wound, speaking quietly to the men he passes. His voice is calm, deliberate, but beneath it there's a rasp, a roughness that wasn't there before. The siege has begun to wear him down, too. Inside the chapel, the priest kneels in front of the altar again, though now even his faith seems muted. He prays not for victory, but for endurance, for the walls to hold one more day, for the hearts within them not to crumble before the stone does. Outside, the air is still. The valley lies in pale silence, the engines quiet for now. By evening, a fine layer of dust covers everything: armor, bread, hair, the pages of books. The castle smells of limestone and sweat and smoke. The defenders eat in silence, chewing slowly, listening for any hint that the engines might start again. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind sounds suspicious. And yet, as night falls again, something shifts in the air. The fear is still there, but dulled, replaced by a strange, exhausted calm. The mind begins to accept the rhythm: strike, pause, rebuild, rest. The sounds that once felt unbearable have become part of the castle's pulse. Even the youngest soldiers no longer flinch. They have learned to live with the noise, to sleep between impacts, to dream in vibrations. In the deepest hours of night, the last watch stands under the fading stars. The mist has returned, wrapping the towers like gauze. From somewhere unseen comes a single, faint creak, the sound of a rope tightening, far out in the dark. The guard straightens, listening, waiting for the rush that will follow. But it doesn't come, not yet. The sound fades, swallowed by the fog. He exhales, lowers his spear, and leans against the wall again. The stone beneath his hand is still warm from the day's bombardment. He closes his eyes, and for a moment he can almost imagine the heartbeat of the castle. Slow, steady, unbroken. He lets that rhythm carry him until his own breathing matches it. Until the fear quiets. Until all that remains is the sound of the wind whispering through the cracks. The castle wakes to silence again, but this silence is different. It is not the uneasy quiet after bombardment, nor the fog-muted pause before another attack. It is the stillness of exhaustion, of days spent counting rations, and nights spent listening to the slow collapse of courage. The air inside the walls has changed. It carries the scent of smoke, sweat, and something faintly sour, the smell of stored food beginning to turn. In the kitchens, the great pots that once boiled with grain and meat now sit blackened and dry. The scullions scrape the bottoms, collecting what little can be found. A handful of peas, the rind of a salted ham, crumbs swept from the corners of the floor. Each discovery feels like treasure. The cook, a broad man who once barked orders and jokes in equal measure, now speaks softly and rarely. His ladle has become a measure of mercy. Meals are quieter now. No laughter, no quarrels over portions. Only the scrape of wooden spoons and the slow chewing of people pretending not to notice how thin the soup has become. The garrison commander eats last, taking what remains after everyone else. No one speaks of it, but they all see him push his bowl aside half full, leaving the illusion of fairness intact. By midday, the walls grow hot in the pale sun, and the air inside feels heavy with the smell of limestone dust and stale breath. The well in the courtyard still runs clear, but the bucket ropes are fraying, and each creak as they descend echoes like a warning. Those who draw water take turns humming softly, if only to fill the empty space. The sound of the siege outside has changed too. The engines do not fire every day now. Sometimes the enemy seems to vanish entirely, only to return with distant hammering or the faint cry of a horn. The waiting gnaws at the defenders more than the noise ever did. Uncertainty has become its own kind of hunger. At night, the castle grows restless. The men dream of feasts, of roasted meat and warm bread, of the taste of salt on their tongues. They wake, biting their lips, swallowing the memory. In the barracks, one soldier keeps a small crust of bread hidden in a rag, not to eat, but to smell when the emptiness feels too sharp. Another claims he can hear rats in the walls and sets traps, though none are ever caught. The women who once tended the injured now count the remaining herbs, measuring each leaf like gold. The wounded have stopped asking for more than water. Their bandages smell of vinegar and dust. The moans that once filled the infirmary have softened into the quiet breathing of those too weak to cry out. Down in the cellar, where the air is cool and damp, a group of men are sorting what's left of the grain sacks. They speak in low voices, careful not to let their words echo. The grain is beginning to rot, dark patches creeping from the bottom upward. They sift through it with trembling hands, separating what might still be edible. Above them, the walls groan faintly, as if listening. In the great hall, the tapestries still hang, though the colors have faded beneath the dust. Once they were proud scenes of battles won and kings crowned. Now they look like memories left too long in the sun. The priest walks past them each morning, eyes lowered, lips moving in prayer. He prays not for victory anymore, but for strength, for the walls to stand, for the people inside to hold to their humanity. Hunger does strange things to the mind. The senses sharpen at first, every smell stronger, every sound clearer. The creak of a door becomes a shout, the rustle of clothing a promise. Then the world begins to blur. Faces grow hollow, eyes distant. People move slower, not from caution but because energy itself has become a currency too precious to spend. By the fifth day of true hunger, time begins to lose its shape. Morning and evening feel the same pale light, filtered through dust and fatigue. The guards forget how long their shifts last. Some fall asleep standing, others simply stare at the horizon, where the enemy fires burn low and steady, like stars that never rise or set. Still, people pass it often, touching its bark as if it might still bear something sweet. One evening, a child presses his ear to the trunk, claiming he can hear water moving inside. The others smile weakly, unwilling to break the illusion. When the wind changes, new smells drift over the walls: smoke, cooking meat, laughter from the enemy camp. The defenders can taste it in their throats, that distant mockery of plenty. Someone throws a stone over the wall in frustration, though it lands far short. The sound it makes when it hits the ground is soft, almost pitiful. Inside, tempers flare more easily now. Two men fight over a piece of bread no bigger than a coin. It's broken up before anyone is hurt, but the silence afterward feels dangerous. Everyone saw it. Everyone understood. There are rules in a siege, unspoken but sacred. Share what you have, don't steal, don't hoard. When those break, the walls themselves begin to crumble. The commander calls a meeting that night. His voice, once firm and commanding, now carries the rasp of dust and sleeplessness. He speaks simply that the rations will be halved again, that the food must last, that no one will be left behind. No one argues, but when they leave the hall, no one looks at each other either. The next morning, the air feels colder. The mist clings to the stones and refuses to lift. The fires burn low, more smoke than flame. The soldiers no longer sharpen their blades. There is little use for steel when hunger has already disarmed them. The sound of the siege engines outside has become rare enough that it almost startles them when it returns. A single boulder strikes the outer wall just after dawn. It doesn't break through, but it does shake loose a rain of dust and a small cascade of pebbles from an upper parapet. One of the guards laughs bitterly, saying the castle seems to be crumbling faster from the inside than from the enemy's stones. No one replies. By now, the castle's voice has changed. The sounds that once defined it, clanging hammers, shouted orders, creaking gates, have been replaced by smaller, more fragile noises. The scrape of spoons, the sigh of wind through empty corridors, the quiet rattle of teeth against cold metal bowls. Even footsteps sound lighter, hesitant, as if the floor itself might resent the weight. The children sleep more. The old men sit by the walls and talk less. The women hum to themselves while mending clothes that no longer need mending, their needles moving in rhythm with the faint, unseen drip of water somewhere deep within the stone. And yet, amid all this, the castle still breathes. There's life in it, quiet, stubborn, slow. At night, the guards still climb the towers, still light the torches, still watch the mist for movement. The human spirit, starved but unbroken, flickers faintly in every small act of routine. One evening, as the sun sinks low and the sky turns the color of ash, The cook emerges from the kitchen, holding something round and steaming. The smell spreads quickly, earthy, strange, but warm. He's made a broth from roots and weeds found near the moat, thickened with what little flour remains. It's bitter, but it fills the belly. For a moment, the hall hums again with quiet gratitude. The castle feels almost alive with warmth. The priest blesses the meal, his voice trembling as he thanks not God, but the hands that still work and the hearts that still wait. People bow their heads, not out of piety, but because the gesture feels like a small way to stay human. When darkness falls, they return to their posts, their beds, their corners. The castle sinks into its nightly hush. Outside, the enemy fires flicker faintly through the mist. Inside, the air is thick but still. Hunger lingers, quiet but patient, an unseen guest that has learned to make itself at home among them. In the small hours, when even the wind is still, the stonemason wakes suddenly. He thinks he heard something, not the engines, not footsteps, but a soft creak from deep within the wall. He touches the cold stone beside his bed, feeling the faint tremor there. The castle, too, is starving. It's holding its breath, conserving what strength it has left. He closes his eyes, whispering once more for it to hold. And for the moment, it does. The walls stand. The people endure. The silence deepens. Tomorrow will bring whatever it brings. Another stone, another day of hunger, another whisper of hope that the siege will end. But for now, in the still air of the castle's long night, the world is reduced to three sounds: the faint creak of old timber, the slow rhythm of breathing, and the patient heartbeat of a fortress that refuses to fall. The castle wakes to a tension sharper than any sound outside its walls. The siege has worn on for weeks, and the hunger inside has begun to gnaw, not just at stomachs, but at hearts. The air smells faintly sour now, a mixture of sweat, spoiled rations, and the faint metallic tamps of fear. Every corner feels smaller, every corridor longer. People glance at one another with suspicion, reading shadows for intentions that may not exist. Trust has become a luxury none can afford. It starts with small things. A missing ration here, a jar of oil gone there. No one speaks of it aloud. The commander notices, but he cannot punish shadows. Whispers ripple through the barracks, soft enough that the walls do not catch them, but persistent, like a dull drum. Some claim they saw a man take a loaf into his room. Others insist they heard the scrape of a hidden bag. The truth becomes almost irrelevant. The suspicion itself infects the air. In the kitchens, the cook moves silently among the few remaining pots. His face is gaunt, his hands shaking. He knows better than to accuse anyone, for hunger breeds desperation in strange ways. But when he lifts a lid to check a stew, it has been stirred, the ration reduced. He sighs, a long drawn-out sound, and sets the pot back down. The walls seem to listen, echoing the quiet betrayal. The men on the walls feel it too. Where once their eyes scanned the mist for the enemy, now they scan one another. A guard lingers too long at a post, another suddenly disappears from the watchtower. The captain asks questions, but the answers are vague, nervous. He frowns, knowing the castle itself is fraying, piece by piece, from within. By midday, the tension has become tangible. Small quarrels erupt over a crust of bread or the cleanest water from the well. Words are exchanged, sharp and quick, and the echo carries down the stone halls. There are threats, muttered under breaths, and one soldier even raises a hand in anger, only to let it fall again, trembling. The hunger is no longer just physical. It has grown teeth, gnawing at patience and loyalty alike. In one chamber, two women argue over a single ration of grain. Their voices are low, urgent. Outside, a sentry leans against the wall, listening. He doesn't move, but the tension travels through him like a current. He feels the subtle shift in the castle, a kind of vibration that has nothing to do with engines or stones. It is the sound of fear, amplified, made concrete. The priest walks among them quietly, his hands folded, his lips moving in silent prayer. He sees the furrowed brows, the clenched fists, the glances that dart too quickly. He touches no one, says nothing, only hopes that faith, however fragile, will hold against this invisible erosion. But even he feels it, a crack that is not in stone, but in human hearts. The first real betrayal comes quietly. A soldier who has guarded the inner gate for weeks disappears with a handful of bread. When questioned, he lies, voice trembling but convincing. The captain knows the truth but has no proof. He lets the matter drop, hoping the man will be found, hoping the act does not spread. But whispers already coil through the walls. That evening, a child vanishes from the barracks. For hours, no one can find him. The men search silently, casting shadows into corners and stairwells, finding only dust and their own fear reflected back. When he is found, hiding under a pile of straw, pale and shaking, the whispers begin again. Who left him alone? Who failed to watch? It is no longer just hunger or fear outside the walls. It is suspicion, a slow contagion that seeps into every interaction. The castle's defenders are now haunted not only by the enemy beyond, but by one another. Every footstep is measured. Every glance is a question. Men who once shared bread now clutch what little they have to themselves. Women who once sang to pass the hours now whisper warnings to empty corners. The air vibrates with a tension that cannot be quieted by prayer, ration, or patrol. In the great hall, the commander gathers what remains of his senior men. He speaks in low, deliberate tones about discipline and trust. His voice is calm, but the lines of his face betray exhaustion. Hunger has sharpened the edges of fear into suspicion, and suspicion can cut as deep as any sword. The men nod, but when they leave the hall, their eyes linger on one another a moment too long. That night, the betrayal grows bolder. A soldier steals a pot of water from the kitchen and hides it beneath a stairwell. Another pockets a handful of dried beans meant for the sick. The castle walls, once a haven, now feel like a cage. The stones seem to close in, and the corridors echo with quiet, accusing footsteps. Every sound becomes suspect. A cough, a creak, the rustle of cloth. Even the children feel it. They watch the adults with wide eyes, learning the language of fear and secrecy. Some hide scraps of bread under their pillows. Others pretend to sleep while listening to whispered arguments in the hallway. The innocence of the castle has been eaten away by hunger, leaving behind a tense, fragile vigilance that stretches from the tallest tower to the deepest cellar. By midnight, the commander has to make a decision. He orders a strict rationing of all food and water, demanding that each person account for what they have taken. The soldiers comply, but the mood has... Even the priest cannot soften the tension. He moves through the halls, offering blessings, words of comfort, prayers for courage. Some listen, some do not. Hunger has made everyone skeptical, even of kindness. The castle is now a place of shadows, not just of night, and the walls feel different, older, quieter, watching. The next day, a small argument over water turns violent. A guard shoves another, who trips and falls. The fall is minor, but the echoes through the hall are loud, filled with accusation and dread. No one steps in. Everyone knows the danger of speaking too loudly, of appearing to take sides. The castle holds, but the threads that bind its people are fraying. At night, the soldiers climb the walls again. The enemy is quiet for now, and the valley lies under a thin mist. The guards lean against the merlons, breathing heavily, listening to the castle's own groans. The stones beneath them have begun to change, settling differently under the strain of human fatigue and hunger. Every creak seems louder, every shadow longer. In the courtyard, a child whispers to a soldier about the missing bread. The man pats him on the head, saying nothing. But the fear is now generational, taught quietly in murmurs and glances. The walls seem to sigh with them, carrying every stolen morsel, every whispered accusation, every stolen glance. By the time the moon rises, the castle is quieter, not because peace has returned, but because people are exhausted. They move like shadows, careful, deliberate, wary. The hunger is not only in their stomachs, it is in their trust, in their patience, in their hope. It gnaws at everything inside, and the walls echo with its slow, patient presence. Somewhere in the darkness, the stolen bread is eaten quietly. No one sees, no one knows. The castle holds, but the betrayal has taken root. It will grow, slow and inevitable, shaping the days to come. Even the captain feels it. He walks the walls alone for a moment, staring into the mist that shrouds the valley. The enemy is quiet, but that is no comfort. The danger has shifted. It is now inside the walls, between the stones and between the people. And he knows, with a chill he cannot shake, that the walls themselves cannot stop what hunger has begun. As the night deepens, the castle sleeps uneasily. The walls creak, the floors groan, the wind whispers through empty battlements. And somewhere inside, hearts beat faster with suspicion, slower with fatigue, trembling with the weight of trust lost, and the knowledge that survival now depends on shadows as much as stones. The betrayal within the walls has begun, and the siege is no longer only the enemies to wage. The first light of dawn stretches lazily across the castle's towers, casting long shadows over the battered courtyard. The air is thick with a mixture of mist, smoke, and the faint temps of sweat that has soaked the walls over the past weeks. The sounds of the enemy are faint at first, a distant creak, a lone battering ram appears at the breach, swung by a team of soldiers beyond the wall. Its wooden frame groans under the weight, and each strike sends tremors that make the inner gates quiver. The courtyard is alive with motion now, men rushing to reinforce, to push fallen stones back into place, to brace the gates with whatever they can find. Sweat and dust mix on every face, eyes squinting against the sun and the rain of debris. Inside the castle, the emotional decay reaches a new depth. The fear and hunger that have haunted the defenders for weeks now fuse with the physical threat of the breach. Trust is nearly gone. Men whisper suspicions of collusion, of those who might open the gates for a morsel of food or a promise of survival. A hand lingers over a sword. A glance lingers too long. The walls are no longer just barriers against the enemy outside. They are fragile membranes holding a group of humans teetering on the edge of desperation. The priest walks among them, offering words of comfort that sometimes fall on deaf ears. His voice is steady, though he is aware that faith alone cannot mend stones or fill bellies. He touches a shoulder here, clasps a hand there, whispering blessings, prayers, quiet encouragements, but the castle itself seems too tense to be soothed. Its walls creak with the strain of defense, its stones humming with the weight of lives pressing against them. The enemy presses harder. Arrows streak through the mist, some catching in shields, some thudding harmlessly into the stone. The ram swings again, each strike more calculated, more precise. One of the defenders falls, crushed by a fragment of masonry dislodged by a boulder. His comrades gasp, hauling him to safety, but the impact shakes their resolve. The sound of the breach has now become a drumbeat in their bones, a rhythm they cannot ignore. Inside the inner chambers, whispers grow into arguments. Men and women argue over rations, over tasks, over who should be on the walls next. The tension is palpable. Each exchange a spark in dry tinder. A soldier accuses another of hoarding water. A woman protests, saying the child must have more. The arguments are quiet, but they carry the weight of survival, of fear, of a siege that has lasted too long. The breach widens further by afternoon. A section of the gatehouse splinters, timber cracking under the strain of battering ram and boulders. Dust clouds billow up, coating faces, making it difficult to see. Shouts rise, not in triumph, but in coordination. Arrows fly, stones are thrown from improvised catapults, and every strike outside echoes through the hollowed walls. The castle shudders, as if aware that its first wound is no longer small or survivable by effort alone. In the courtyard, soldiers haul stone and timber to reinforce the gate, voices low, determined, and tight with exhaustion. One young archer collapses, too weak to continue, and another drags him to the wall, whispering reassurances that neither believes fully. The castle is alive with effort, with motion, with the slow, grinding persistence that has kept it standing this long. By evening, the sun casts long shadows over a battered gatehouse. The breach is undeniable now, a gaping wound lined with splintered wood and cracked stone. The enemy does not celebrate. They prepare for the next push, aware that the psychological toll inside the walls may now be greater than the physical one. The defenders stare at the gap, breathing heavily, realizing that the first true victory of the enemy is the fear it has instilled. As night falls, the mist thickens, hiding movement outside, masking figures that inch closer to the breach. Inside, the castle shudders with every small tremor, every cough, every whisper. Hunger, fatigue, and fear twist together, creating an atmosphere almost tangible, pressing against every shoulder, every chest, every heartbeat. The commander walks along the walls, inspecting every repair, every brace, every effort to hold the breach. He sees the exhaustion in every eye, the pale faces of the defenders, the tight jaws and shaking hands, and yet they continue, they move, they brace, they fire, they mend. The castle may be wounded, but it still breathes, stubborn, defiant, alive. The priest lights candles in the chapel, offering prayers not just for survival, but for courage. Outside, the faintest glimmer of enemy fires burns in the mist. Inside, the stones hum with the weight of the living, the dying, the fearful, and the steadfast. The night deepens, and with it, a fragile rhythm returns. Strike, brace, hold, endure. The breach is real, the walls are scarred, the people are fraying, but the castle itself continues to stand, sheltering them from complete chaos, carrying the pulse of the siege in its own stubborn heartbeat. And somewhere in the darkness, the enemy pauses, perhaps sensing the cost of the fight, perhaps calculating the next strike. The defenders do not sleep, they do not rest, they cling to what little order remains, knowing that the next day may demand more than stones and arrows. It may demand everything that still keeps their hearts within them. The breach has begun. The castle trembles, the people quiver, and the siege presses on, relentless, intimate, unforgiving. The first tendrils of smoke curl up through the mist before the sun has fully risen. The castle, already weakened by weeks of siege and days of breach, trembles under the soundless alarm that rises in the hearts of its people. Hunger has hollowed the guards' faces, and fear has sharpened their nerves to brittle edges. Even the stones seem to shiver, whispering warnings in the language only those who live inside can understand. It begins subtly. A small flame, almost laughably insignificant, licks at the edge of a thatched roof in the inner courtyard. Perhaps it is an ember carried by the wind, or perhaps the enemy has found a way inside. The first witnesses, 2 soldiers hauling water to the gatehouse, freeze, staring at the rising smoke as if it were a living creature. The smell of burning wood drifts toward them, sharp and acrid, mingling with the tang of sweat and stone. Their hearts pound in unison, and their breath comes faster, tasting dust and fear. The commander is already on the walls, moving with a precision born of experience and necessity. He has learned that panic is more dangerous than any boulder or ram. His eyes scan the courtyard below, noting the flames' slow spread. Buckets, he orders, voice low but commanding. Bring water now. The men move quickly, but each step carries the weight of exhaustion. Arms ache, legs tremble, and the constant gnaw of hunger makes coordination an effort in itself. Inside the courtyard, the fire gains a voice of its own. The crackle and hiss of burning wood grow louder with every moment. Sparks drift upward, catching on dry thatch and ropes, and the air thickens with smoke. Visibility drops, and the first panic trickles through the defenders. Some shout warnings, others drop buckets and run to help. The rhythm of controlled work is replaced by urgent chaos. The priest emerges from the chapel, arms raised in a gesture that is part blessing, part plea for calm. His voice is almost drowned by the roar of the flames, but he continues anyway, whispering prayers under his breath for protection and courage. He sees soldiers faltering, stepping back from the fire, their exhaustion now mingling with terror. He moves between them, steadying hands, offering quiet encouragement, reminding them of the wall's strength, of their own resilience. The breach in the outer wall has emboldened the enemy. From the mist beyond, faint shapes move, indistinct but deliberate. They are close now, their whispers and movements audible through the pale light. Archers at the parapets fire arrows, each shot aimed at the emerging figures, but fatigue slows their aim. Some arrows fall short, some strike the stone, and others miss entirely. Every missed arrow carries weight, not just the potential for injury, but the creeping sense that the castle's defenses are failing. Inside, suspicion heightens the chaos. The previous betrayals and acts of hoarding have left invisible cracks between the defenders. When a man stumbles while carrying water to douse the flames, another shoves him aside, muttering accusations under his breath. Eyes narrow, fists clench. The human tension now blends with the immediate threat of fire and enemy assault. Hunger, fear, and distrust have created an atmosphere nearly as dangerous as the flames themselves. Children, hidden in corners, press their hands to their mouths to stifle cries. They watch the smoke curl around the upper stories, hear the crackling of thatch and timber, and feel the vibrations of chaos through the stone floor. Their wide eyes reflect the flickering firelight, absorbing lessons of fear and endurance too heavy for their years. In some, it sparks courage. In others, a trembling that will linger for nights to come. The women of the inner chambers move with grim determination. Buckets are filled and passed along the line from the well to the courtyard. Linen and blankets are soaked in water and dragged to smother flames where possible. The smoke stings eyes, and the heat presses against the skin like a living hand, but they work silently, communicating through gestures and quiet murmurs. Even exhaustion is not enough to halt their motion. Each movement is survival, each breath a negotiation with the fire itself. The fire spreads unevenly, licking at ropes, brushing against wooden scaffolds, and catching fragments of straw used to patch holes in the walls. Sparks drift across the courtyard, landing perilously close to the inner gate. A shout rises as a guard scrambles to protect the gate, throwing barrels into position to block potential ignition. The heat presses downward, heavy and relentless, reminding everyone that the castle is vulnerable, that its walls can be breached not only by enemies, but by elemental forces now amplified by human carelessness and desperation. The first serious injuries occur when a burning ember falls into the midst of the waterline. A soldier yelps, grabbing at the burning cloth, his hand blistered instantly. The cries. On the walls, the guards speak less, eyes constantly scanning corners and shadowed alcoves, wary of each other as much as of the enemy beyond. Arrows are notched and strings pulled, but aim falters, hands tremble. Every sound, a creak, a shuffle, a whispered breath, becomes suspect. Whispers begin to spread, almost inaudible at first, until they swell into a chorus of doubt. Who can be trusted? Who is watching, waiting, moving unseen in the corridors? The first attack is quiet, intimate. A soldier finds himself alone in the north tower, checking supplies. A hand grabs him from behind. A blade flashes, and he collapses, silent except for a sharp intake of air. No alarm is raised. His absence is noted only in passing. The castle has grown accustomed to the absence of those who fall, whether to hunger, fatigue, or now, a hidden enemy. The walls hold the echoes of his struggle, the faint stain of blood on the stone, and a warning that seems to whisper to all who remain. Inside, suspicion mutates into paranoia. Men glance over their shoulders, questioning the intentions of those they have fought beside for weeks. A young archer hesitates to hand a quiver to his companion, afraid that trust might invite death. In the barracks, whispers flit like shadows, reaching ears that strain to hear, twisting words into threats. The castle is no longer merely a stone fortress. It is a labyrinth of fear, each corridor a potential trap, each shadow a hidden blade. The priest senses the shift before anyone else. Walking through the halls, he notices a pattern in the fear, a rhythm to the tension. Faces are pale, eyes darting. Words are chosen cautiously, syllables weighed against potential betrayal. He offers blessings, murmurs, prayers, and touches shoulders with hands that tremble. Still, he cannot quell the instinctive fear that has taken root. It is not the enemy outside that threatens most, but the unseen presence within, patient, quiet, and deadly. Even the women in the inner chambers sense it. They move with heightened awareness, checking doors twice, tightening knots on their linens and water containers, listening for any sound that might indicate intrusion. The children, too, are aware, pressing close to their mothers or older siblings, learning instinctively the language of silence, of caution, of fear that does not announce itself. The assassin strikes again as the sun climbs higher. A guard disappears from the parapet, leaving his post momentarily unattended. When he is found, moments later, there is no sign of struggle, only a faint smear of blood and the absence of his weapon. The soldiers glance at one another, questions forming in their minds, suspicion sharpening with every heartbeat. Eyes dart over the battlements, into the halls, down to the courtyard, seeking the unseen enemy who moves with precision and patience. By midday, the castle is alive with a tense, nervous energy. Every step echoes through the stone halls. Every creak, every shift of armor, every cough is magnified into potential threat. Hunger gnaws at the stomach, fatigue weighs down limbs, and fear gnaws at trust. The walls, once a bastion of safety, feel closer, confining, as if they have become accomplices to the silent predator, moving among the people they are meant to protect. The commander calls a council of the remaining senior men. Voices are hushed, words carefully chosen. "We have an intruder," he says, his tone flat, heavy with the weight of exhaustion. Someone moves within. Watch each other. Trust no one without evidence. Patrol in pairs, and pray that this ends before the walls are breached again. The men nod, eyes flicking toward one another, searching for signs of guilt or fear. Every gesture is scrutinized, every hesitation noted. The day stretches on with tense, controlled vigilance. Guards patrol the corridors in pairs, whispers carry like warnings, and every sound is analyzed. The assassin does not strike in the light of day, nor does he leave clear signs. Instead, He moves in shadows, exploiting weakness, fatigue, and the cracks in human trust that hunger has created. Each disappearance, each theft, each whispered warning becomes a story passed along quietly, amplifying fear without providing clarity. By late afternoon, the psychological toll is evident. Soldiers who once moved with confidence now hesitate at corners. Archers pause, hands shaking as they nock arrows. The men on the walls jump at every shadow, seeing threats in the mist beyond as well as within. The castle, already scarred by fire and breach, now vibrates with a new form of tension. The knowledge that the enemy is not always visible, not always outside, but possibly inside. Always patient, always silent. The priest continues to move quietly, offering comfort to those he can reach. A hand on a shoulder here, a whispered prayer there. He notices trembling, not just in bodies, but in eyes, in voices, in the way a man hesitates before speaking. The assassin is a ghost, and the castle's defenders feel his presence like a cold draft through stone corridors. Even children whisper warnings to one another, instinctively avoiding areas deemed dangerous, learning fear in its most subtle, intimate form. As night falls, the silence grows heavy. Patrols move more slowly, each step measured. Torches flicker in the halls, casting long shadows that twist like living things. Every door is checked twice, every lock secured. Every eye watches not just the halls, but one another. The castle seems to hold its breath, aware that the night drifts on. The castle breathes with careful, measured motions, each defender acutely aware that the enemy is not merely beyond the breach or the outer walls, but inside, patient, calculating, silent. The walls hold, for now, but the human heart falters more easily than stone. Each shadow is a question, each step a potential threat, and every quiet moment is haunted by the knowledge that the silent assassin could strike at any time, anywhere. The morning light seeps weakly through the mist, casting pale, trembling shadows across the castle courtyard. After nights of fire, betrayal, and the silent menace stalking the corridors, every stone feels heavier, every beam more precarious. The castle itself seems to sag under the weight of its own endurance. Hunger has hollowed the defenders' faces, fatigue has stiffened their limbs, and fear has sharpened every glance into suspicion. Even the walls, scarred and cracked, seem to lean in closer, whispering warnings that no one dares to speak aloud. High above, the watchtower trembles, its timbers groan under strain, cracked and charred from the fire that licked at the inner courtyard days before. The base has shifted slightly, stones loosened by the battering of enemy engines, and the tremor of collapsing walls. The men stationed there move carefully, checking ropes, bracing wooden supports, and whispering reassurances to one another. Yet beneath every careful movement is a knot of dread, the knowledge that the tower could fail at any moment. And if it does, the consequences would ripple through the castle like an earthquake. The commander ascends the spiral stair, his boots echoing faintly against worn stone. He surveys the courtyard, the inner gates, and the breach in the outer wall, eyes narrowing at the minor collapses and the still smoldering remnants of fire. Each sight sends a shiver through him. He knows that the walls can hold, but the towers, with their height and exposure, may not. Every day of siege has left them weaker. Every attack of fire and ram has chipped away at the integrity of stone and timber alike. The watchtower, he realizes, is a crown jewel of vulnerability. Inside the tower, men prepare for their duties. The archers stretch bows over the battlements, quivers nearly empty. A young soldier, no older than 15, peers over the parapet, eyes wide with fatigue and fear. Every movement is slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic, as though any sudden action could trigger disaster. The smell of smoke lingers faintly in the air, mixed with the sweat and dust of the castle's long endurance. Even the stones seem to sigh under the weight of countless footsteps, of repeated strain and trembling effort. At midday, a loud, resonant crack echoes from above. The soldiers freeze, eyes widening as a section of the upper watchtower tilts slightly, a beam splitting along a long fracture. Dust cascades down the stairwell and onto the courtyard below, making men cough and stumble. The sound is subtle at first, almost like the settling of stone, but the unease it provokes is immediate and sharp. The young archer swallows hard, gripping his bow tighter, realizing instinctively that this is no ordinary tremor. The tower itself is speaking, and its message is clear. It will not hold much longer. The commander rushes to the base of the tower, calling for reinforcements. Men haul heavy timbers and stones, wedging supports wherever they can. Ropes are tied, knots checked and doubled. Yet each piece of lumber feels insufficient. Each stone seems to light against the magnitude of the threat. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the faint, bitter tang of fear. Every heartbeat is magnified, every breath measured, as the defenders scramble to hold the unsteady structure. From beyond the outer wall, the enemy is no longer merely patient. They have become opportunistic. A distant shout, a clash of metal, and the rhythm of attack rises once more. The sounds travel through the battered walls, mingling with the creaks of the watchtower and the hurried whispers of soldiers. Each echo seems louder than the last, amplifying the tension inside the castle. The walls themselves tremble, stones shifting slightly, responding to the vibrations in ways that unsettle even the most seasoned defenders. Inside the tower, small accidents begin to compound the danger. A loose stone falls from the battlements, striking a guard on the shoulder. He stumbles backward, nearly losing balance, and another soldier catches him just in time. The stress in the air is palpable. Even minor slips become crises. Eyes dart upward constantly, monitoring each beam, each stone, each creaking rope. Every breath carries the weight of anticipation. Every motion is performed with an awareness sharpened to the edge of fear. The first collapse comes subtly, in a whisper, before a roar. A section of the upper parapet gives way, sending splintered wood crashing down into the stairwell. The sound is deafening in the enclosed space, dust choking the lungs, making eyes water and movements awkward. Soldiers stagger, scrambling to hold positions, some falling, others gripping beams or stonework to prevent further disaster. The commander calls out instructions, but the noise, the panic, and the tremors make communication difficult. Every word is drowned in the cacophony of destruction. Below, in the courtyard, the defenders feel the tremors through the stone floor. Each impact resonates like a drumbeat against their chests. The smell of dust and splintered timber fills the air. Archers glance nervously at the upper tower, hands shaking as they nock arrows. Even those tasked with defending the breach cannot ignore the disaster unfolding above. The castle feels alive with tension, each structure and human being vibrating with the threat of imminent collapse. By afternoon, the tower is a skeleton of its former strength. Beams have cracked, stones have loosened, and the upper section leans precariously. Soldiers cling to walls, to ropes, to each other, each motion deliberate, calculated, desperate. The young archer's hands tremble as he stretches an arrow over the battlement, realizing that one wrong step could send him plunging into the courtyard below. The commander moves methodically, supervising every brace, every repair, every attempt to stabilize the failing structure. His eyes are sharp, his voice calm, but inside, every heartbeat screams urgency. The enemy notices from the mist beyond. Small groups of soldiers gather, eyes trained on the weakened tower. Their movements are deliberate but cautious, understanding that the castle's defenders are concentrated there. Every boulder hurled, every ram swung, every arrow fired is calculated to exploit the vulnerability. They sense the psychological impact as much as the physical. They know that fear of collapse can unbalance even the most disciplined defenders. Inside, the psychological strain escalates. Fatigue and hunger have already frayed nerves. Now, with the tower failing above, panic threads through the soldiers. One guard yells when a stone drops unexpectedly. Another curses under his breath, blaming a companion for poor bracing. Every small misstep is magnified. Every sigh becomes a warning. Every glance a judgment. The castle is no longer merely a fortress of stone. It is a fragile organism of fear, stress, and human endurance. As evening approaches, the tower finally gives way. A deafening crash echoes across the castle, the upper section of the watchtower splitting and falling with terrifying inevitability. Dust and debris rain down, striking the courtyard, crushing a few unfortunate soldiers, and scattering supplies. The ground shakes, a wave of tremor rippling through the inner walls. The defenders reel from the impact, some falling, others scrambling to rescue the wounded. The commander shouts orders, his voice hoarse but urgent, directing men to form a defensive line, to secure what remains, to brace for the next phase of chaos. The castle groans under the weight of the collapse. Stones shift, splintered beams fall further, and the air is thick with dust and smoke. Every breath tastes of stone, ash, and sweat. The surviving defenders are covered in grime, faces streaked with tears, sweat, and soot. The fire from previous days lingers faintly in the corners, adding a bitter temps to the already acrid air. Hunger gnaws at their bellies, fear gnaws at their hearts, and exhaustion gnaws at their limbs. In the inner chambers, whispers of panic grow. Some soldiers refuse to move from cover, staring at the wreckage above. Others argue over whether to risk leaving the relative safety of stone walls to recover supplies or tend to the wounded. Suspicion threads through the ranks as heavily as fear. Every misstep, every glance, every unspoken word is analyzed. The silent assassin from previous nights could be anywhere, and the collapse has created new shadows, new hiding places, new opportunities for unseen threats. By nightfall, the dust has begun to settle. The courtyard is a scene of chaos, charred wood and fallen stone mingling with bodies and debris. The watchtower, once a proud sentinel over the castle, lies in ruins, a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky. The survivors move cautiously, their muscles aching, their breaths shallow, their hearts hammering with exhaustion and dread. Yet, even in the wreckage, a quiet determination persists. They brace, they whisper, they move in slow, deliberate motions, understanding that the castle must endure, even if its crown has fallen. The priest walks through the rubble-strewn courtyard, offering prayers and comfort. His hands are streaked with dust, his robes singed at the hem. He whispers blessings to the wounded, tends to the frightened, and steadies those whose hands shake so violently that they cannot carry even a bucket of water. Even his calm voice struggles to reach through the weight of the day's disasters. But he continues, a tether to reason and faith in a castle shaken to its foundations. Outside, the enemy prepares for the next move, sensing weakness, vulnerability, and fatigue. Inside, the defenders cling to order, to courage, to one another. The castle has lost its watchtower, but it has not lost its will. The night stretches long and heavy, filled with the echoes of falling stone, crackling fire, whispered prayers, and the constant, gnawing presence of fear. And as the moon rises, casting pale light over the battered walls, the castle breathes in slow, deliberate rhythms. Each stone, each beam, each trembling heart holds a momentary balance between collapse and endurance, between despair and stubborn hope. The watchtower has fallen, but the fortress lives, and the people within it cling to that fragile human truth, waiting for whatever dawn may bring. The final night descends like a heavy shroud over the castle. The sky, dark and swollen with clouds, presses down on the scarred walls, casting deep shadows into every corner, every corridor, every tower that still stands. The air is thick with smoke, dust, and the lingering acrid scent of charred wood. Even the stones seem to breathe with exhaustion, their once proud faces scarred and pitted by fire, siege engines, and the relentless pressure of attack. The defenders move slowly now, each step measured against the weight of fatigue, hunger, and fear. Inside, silence is not peace. It is anticipation, a taut string stretched between walls and hearts alike. The inner courtyard, ravaged by fire, littered with splintered beams and scattered stones, is nearly deserted. Only a few soldiers patrol, eyes sharp despite trembling limbs, senses heightened by exhaustion and the instinct to survive. Whispers carry softly through the halls, barely audible, yet heavy with unspoken dread. They speak of the breach beyond, the silent assassin, the fallen watchtower, and the relentless enemy massing beyond the mist. The commander walks along the walls, moving like a shadow himself, inspecting the defenses one last time. He notes the stones cracked, the parapets weakened, the remnants of burned timber still smoldering in corners. Every decision, every glance, every motion is a negotiation with mortality. His eyes meet those of his remaining soldiers, noting the pale faces, the hollowed eyes, the hands that shake despite their grip on swords and pikes. He does not speak of hope or despair. He simply nods, a gesture of recognition, of shared burden, of defiance. The priest lingers in the chapel, kneeling among the remnants of dust and debris, whispering prayers not just for survival, but for courage, for endurance, for the souls of those already claimed by fire, blade, or shadow. Children huddle nearby, wide-eyed, listening to the quiet murmur of words they cannot fully understand, yet absorbing the rhythm of calm amidst chaos. The gentle cadence of his voice acts as a tether to reason, a reminder that even in this battered fortress, life persists. Beyond the walls, the enemy presses closer. Their movement is deliberate, careful, amplified by the shadows of night and the chaos that has already fractured the castle's defenses. Siege engines groan faintly in the distance, and the faint clatter of boots over cobblestones echoes through the mist. The defenders feel it in their bones, a pulse of tension, a rhythm of anticipation, a quiet drumbeat of imminent confrontation. Inside, the silent assassin continues to move, exploiting the disorder created by hunger, fatigue, and the psychological toll of weeks under siege. Each corridor and chamber is a stage for suspicion. Soldiers glance over shoulders, eyes narrowing, hands gripping weapons, ready to strike at shadows or perceived threats. Trust is a fragile commodity, traded carefully, rationed like the last drops of water in a drought. Every sound, a whisper, a shuffle, a creak, is dissected, analyzed, feared. As the moon climbs, casting pale light over battered stones and broken battlements, the castle trembles under a new assault. The enemy has positioned battering rams, catapults, and ladders at the weakened gate, exploiting the chaos of the watchtower's collapse. A low, rumbling chant rises through the mist, carrying the promise of violence, the inevitability of confrontation. Inside, the defenders ready themselves. Archers nock arrows, swords are sharpened, shields braced, and the few remaining torches flicker, casting elongated shadows across the scarred stone. The first breach occurs in a subtle, terrifyingly intimate way. A section of the outer wall, already weakened by fire and repeated assault, crumbles under the weight of a ram. Dust and stone cascade into the moat below, and the sound of falling debris vibrates through the inner halls. Soldiers falter, hearts hammering in unison with the distant crash. The commander raises his voice, directing men to fill the breach with rubble, to brace the walls with every available beam, to hold what remains of the gate. The castle has survived much, but this feels different. This feels like the edge of the abyss. Inside, panic threads through the defenders. Hunger gnaws viciously at their resolve. Exhaustion slows every motion, and fear sharpens every glance. The silent assassin strikes again, quiet and lethal, claiming a guard who hesitated too long, leaving behind only a faint smear of blood and a lingering sense of dread. Whispers grow louder, glances sharper, hands shake more violently with the dual burden of imminent threat and human distrust. The castle is alive with tension, vibrating with fear, sweat, dust, and smoke. The inner courtyard becomes a theater of chaos. Buckets of water are passed along to douse the few remaining flames. Splintered beams are dragged aside, and debris is cleared to maintain paths for soldiers to defend the gate and walls. Every movement is heavy with consequence. Every breath tastes of smoke, dust, and iron. Children clutch at mothers, women tighten knots on linens and ropes, and soldiers brace themselves, both physically and mentally, for the inevitable confrontation. Night deepens, and the enemy presses with relentless precision. Arrows whistle over the walls, some striking true, others bouncing harmlessly from stone. Siege engines groan, rocks smash into parapets, and the tremor of attack vibrates through the scarred stone. Inside, every guard, every soldier, every defender moves in a rhythm dictated by fear and experience. Each action deliberate, calculated, necessary. There is no room for hesitation. Hesitation here means death. The commander notices a subtle, horrifying pattern. The enemy is exploiting the fractures in human trust, the gaps left by exhaustion, the hesitation born of fear. He signals to the remaining archers and guards, coordinating movements with gestures and whispers. Every command is delivered swiftly, every action a calculated risk. The castle has become more than stone and mortar. It is a living organism, every defender a vital part of its survival. Suddenly, a section of the wall gives way under pressure. Dust fills the air, stones tumble into the moat, and enemy soldiers pour through the breach. The defenders react instantly, a chaotic symphony of swords, shields, and arrows. Clashing metal rings through the corridors, cries of pain and defiance echo, and the smell of blood mixes with smoke and sweat. Fear and adrenaline pulse together, sharpening reflexes, heightening senses, but also weighing heavily on every limb and every heartbeat. The silent assassin strikes once more, unseen and deadly, exploiting the chaos to claim another life. His presence amplifies the fear, twisting every shadow, every hesitant glance into a potential threat. Inside the castle, soldiers falter, stumble, and regroup. aware that the true danger lies not just outside, but within the very walls they call home. In the chapel, the priest moves quietly among the wounded, offering comfort, tending to injuries, and whispering prayers into ears that barely register words over the roar of battle. The children cling to his robes, absorbing the rhythm of calm amidst chaos, learning instinctively the language of endurance, courage, and quiet defiance in the face of overwhelming fear. The battle reaches a fevered pitch. The inner walls are defended desperately, stones stacked, makeshift barricades erected, every arrow counted, every sword swing deliberate. Soldiers move as one organism, yet human fragility remains. Exhaustion causes hesitation, fear causes doubt, hunger causes mistakes. Every movement carries the weight of survival. Every breath is a negotiation with mortality. Outside, the enemy senses weakness, exploiting every hesitation, every misstep. They press forward with relentless discipline, seeking to exploit the breach, to overwhelm the remaining defenders. Inside, the castle trembles under the strain, the air thick with dust, smoke, and tension. The walls themselves seem to groan, stones shifting slightly under the vibrations of battle, as though the fortress is alive and feeling the pressure of survival alongside its people. Hours pass like slow, torturous waves. The defenders hold, despite the chaos, despite fear, despite fatigue and hunger gnawing relentlessly at their bodies. Every soldier becomes an extension of the walls, every movement a reinforcement of the structure, every breath a quiet prayer that the castle might endure. One more night, one more hour, one more moment. As midnight approaches, the enemy makes a final push, exploiting every crack in the stone, every gap in vigilance, every hesitation born of exhaustion. Arrows rain down, stones crash into parapets, and the walls shudder under repeated assault. Inside, defenders scream, cry, and fight, their bodies slick with sweat, their hands blistered, their hearts pounding in synchrony with the chaos. The commander, standing amidst rubble and blood, raises his sword and shouts orders that cut through the din. Soldiers respond, moving with precision born of desperation, bracing walls, defending breaches, striking where necessary. Fear remains, but so does courage. Exhaustion weighs heavily, but willpower presses on. Hunger gnaws, but survival instincts sharpen. Every heartbeat is amplified, every breath a negotiation with both the enemy and the fragile human mind. As dawn begins to hint at light on the horizon, the final night begins to yield. The enemy, sensing the toll of relentless defense, retreats slightly, gathering forces, reassessing. The defenders, bloodied and battered, stand among the ruins, scarred timbers and shattered stones, hearts still hammering, eyes wide and unblinking. The castle has survived, but at tremendous cost. Every soul inside carries the memory of terror, exhaustion, hunger, and courage etched into their bones. And in the fragile quiet that follows, the survivors begin to move cautiously, tending to the wounded, salvaging what supplies remain, and reinforcing the battered walls. The castle, scarred but unbroken, breathes with the rhythm of human endurance. Every stone, every beam, every trembling heart bears witness to the final night of siege, a night of fear, chaos, bravery, and the relentless human will to survive. The silent assassin has gone, the fire has faded, the watchtower lies in ruin, and yet the castle stands, stubborn and alive. Its walls hold not just stone and mortar, but the pulse of every life inside, every heartbeat that refused to surrender. And as the first light of day washes over the battered battlements, the defenders, exhausted and scarred, take a deep, trembling breath, knowing that even in the darkest siege, survival is a fragile, stubborn, human triumph. The sun rises slowly over the scarred battlements, bathing the castle in pale, forgiving light. The smoke has cleared, the dust begins to settle, and the echoes of battle fade into memory. Stones still tremble under the weight of their wounds, timbers groan in the quiet, and yet, amidst the ruin, life endures. The survivors move carefully, tending to one another, gathering what remains, and finding small moments of solace in the fragile calm. The castle, once a fortress of fear and fire, now breathes in gentle, measured rhythms. Every stone, every beam, every heartbeat within its walls carries the story of courage, endurance, and the human will to survive even the darkest night. The terror of siege is past, leaving behind lessons etched deep into the walls and hearts alike, of fear faced, of hope clung to, and of life stubbornly holding on. And now, as the castle rests and the world outside drifts into quiet, let your mind follow the rhythm of those who endured. Feel the slow, steady pulse of survival, the gentle sigh of stone and timber, the soft murmur of life carried on through darkness. Let the echoes of courage and endurance lull you into peace, and let the memories of the final night fade like shadows at dawn. Good night, traveler. Rest now, and until we meet again, may your dreams wander safely through ancient halls and quiet castles.